Chapter 412. The middle-aged man looked at Zhou Yi with surprise. The empress of the great Zhou. Zhou Yi looked at him indifferently and said coldly, "Old fox." The two looked at each other and didn't do anything else. The clouds above everyone's head suddenly dispersed. There was no killing intent on the mountain peak, but every step was filled with killing intent. The 10,000 Illusion Lord looked at the empress with a hint of fear in his eyes. "You actually came personally?" The 10,000 Illusion Lord looked at Huanji and said, "I only have one daughter. For my precious daughter, I naturally have to come." Zhou Yi said, "He's my subject. For my subject, why can't I come?" As soon as she finished speaking, a stream of light flashed across the horizon. Another figure instantly arrived. Xianjizi looked at Li Mu and asked, "Junior brother, are you all right?" Li Mu smiled and said, "I'm fine." Xianjizi. 10,000 Illusion Lord. Xianjizi and the 10,000 Illusion Lord looked at each other. The latter's gaze swept across Xianjizi and the empress. He waved his sleeve and swept up Huanji and the others, saying, "Let's go." Seeing them turn into streams of light and leave, the empress and Xianjizi didn't stop them. Between transcending realm experts, unless there was a huge difference in strength, they wouldn't easily start a fight. Even if it was 1 against 2, it would be difficult to determine the victor. For the others present, it was a disaster. In the sky, the 10,000 Illusion Lord asked Huanji, "What happened?" Huanji lowered her head and said, "The demonic emperor's inheritance was a scam. It was a trap set up by Emperor 3,000 years ago. His goal was to lure living people in and use their essence blood to revive his demonic corpse. All of us almost died in the hands of that demonic corpse." The 10,000 Illusion Lord asked again, "Did you get the heavenly book?" Huanji shook her head and said, "It should have fallen into Li Mu's hands." The Lord of Illusion said regretfully, "What a pity. If not for the Empress of the Great Zhou and the headmaster of the Fulu School, Xianjizi, who obtained that page of the heavenly book, we would have been able to lead the demon race and restore the glory of the demon race." Huanji asked, "Why didn't Father snatch the heavenly book back?" The Lord of Illusions shook his head and said, "Not to mention Xianjizi, even if the Empress of the Great Zhou was alone, I would not snatch the heavenly tomes from her." Huanji thought of the beautiful woman who descended from the sky and muttered, "She is the Empress of the Great Zhou?" The Lord of Illusions said, "Such a young 7th-level cultivator. She is the only one in the entire mainland. This woman is very strong. I'm afraid that only the elders of the Sage sect have the strength to fight her." Huanji said in disbelief, "But she's so young." The Heavenly Lord of Illusions said leisurely, "How can the Emperor Qi born from the psyche of tens of thousands of people be ordinary? In the 10 continents and 3 islands, there are not many people who are stronger than her." Huanji looked back, clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. The Heavenly Lord of Illusions patted her head and said, "Don't be disappointed. Sooner or later you will reach her cultivation level. When you go back this time, go into seclusion and comprehend the heavenly tomes." Huanji nodded and gritted her teeth. She said, "When I break through, I will deal with you." The Heavenly Lord of Illusions thought of something and his eyes flashed. He said, "The headmaster of the Fulu School and the Empress of the Great Zhou came here personally for him. This Li Mu must have a big secret. He also has the heavenly tomes of the demon clan. He will always be a threat. If there is a chance in the future, we must get rid of him." Huanji raised her head and looked at the Heavenly Lord of Illusions with a complicated expression. She said, "Father, he saved my life." The Heavenly Lord of Illusions frowned and said, "Then it's not easy to kill him. It's best if we can use him. If not, it won't be too late to kill him after you have repaid your debt." On the mountain peak, the bear demon clasped his hands at Li Mu and said, "If there is a chance in the future, Lord Li, please come to my bear clan. I will definitely treat you with great hospitality." The snake demon also clasped his hands at Li Mu and said, "Thank you, Lord Li, for saving my life. You will always be a friend of my clan." Li Mu waved his hand at them and did not make things difficult for them. A large part of the friction between the Great Zhou dynasty and the Fei nation was instigated by the demon Dao. The Fei nation was not a single entity and there were countless Fei kings. Not all of them were enemies with the Great Zhou dynasty. "I will take my leave first." The 2 demons bowed at him at the same time. Their bodies turned into streams of light and disappeared into the forest. This time, the 4 demon kings had sent out the elites of their clans. In the end, only 1 bear and 1 snake remained out of the 25th realm demons. The wolf clan and the leopard clan were completely wiped out. The status of these demon clans in the demon nation would probably change. Other than that, the demon path, the soul sect, and the demon sect did not get any benefits. None of the experts who entered the cave abode came out alive. After today they would probably be reduced to the demon path. In addition to the demon path experts who died at the hands of Li Mu, the demon path would probably have to behave for a long time. On the other hand, although the disciples of the 6 sects and the consecrators of the imperial court were more or less injured, at least none of them were missing. Li Mu was the biggest winner of this trip. As Xian Jizi breathed a sigh of relief, he said, "Junior brother, why don't you leave the Great Zhou court and come to Mount Baiyun to cultivate? The imperial court's mission is too dangerous. If anything happens to you, how am I going to explain it to Marshal Uncle Fu Daozi?" When he heard the news about Li Mu from Hyun Jinko, his heart was in his mouth. If something happened to Li Mu, it would definitely be a huge loss that the Fulu school would not be able to bear. After such a thing happened, he could not be at ease letting Li Mu stay in the Great Zhou court. As Xian Jizi's voice fell, Zhou Yi looked at him indifferently. He did not say anything and looked at the scenery in the distance. However, his fists and his sleeves were tightly clenched. Li Mu shook his head and said, "Cultivation is full of danger, but it is also full of opportunities. If you train yourself more, it will be beneficial for your future cultivation. Cultivating in seclusion at Mount Baiyun is safe, but it will not be beneficial for your future cultivation." Xian Jizi sighed and said, "Junior brother's words make sense. Let's do as you say." Zhou Yi continued to admire the scenery, and his fists and his sleeves were slowly loosened. Li Mu stretched out his hand. With a thought, the Dao bell floated in his palm. He looked at Xian Jizi and said, "There is a strand of Genesis Qi in the White Emperor cave dwelling. The cracks on the Dao bell have already been repaired. Senior brother, bring it back to the mountain." Just as he finished speaking, the Dao bell buzzed and flew behind Li Mu to hide. Xian Jizi said helplessly, "Since the Dao bell is willing to follow junior brother, let it follow you. With the Dao bell by junior brother's side, I will feel more at ease." In truth, Li Mu was just being polite. Who wouldn't want such a powerful treasure? If it wasn't for the Dao bell in the Demon Emperor cave dwelling, they would not have been able to see him. It was also because of the Dao bell that he could be so fearless from beginning to end. Xian Jizi looked at Zhou Yi and said, "Junior brother Ling Jizi, please take care of him, your majesty." Zhou Yi said indifferently, "I will take care of my people. I don't need you to remind me." Xian Jizi did not say anything else. He said to the disciples of the other 5 sects, "Follow me back to Baiyun Mountain. Your elders are also there." The elders of the 5 sects bowed and said yes. Xian Jizi led everyone away. Only Li Mu, the empress, and the high priests were left. Li Mu stretched out his hand and absorbed a ball of light into his body. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, a strange light flashed across his eyes. 3 streaks of light flew over from afar. It was the sloppy Taoist priest and the other 2 high priests. The 2 high priests bowed to the empress and said, "Greetings, your majesty." The sloppy Taoist priest only cupped his hands slightly. When he saw Li Mu, he breathed a sigh of relief. Zhou Yi said calmly, "Let's go back to Fairy's capital." She grabbed Li Mu's shoulder and the 2 of them disappeared instantly. On the spot, one of the high priests sighed and said, "Master Li is indeed a favored official. To save him, the empress actually came personally." The sloppy Taoist priest put his hands behind his head and said indifferently, "I really do favor him. As for whether he's a subordinate or not, I don't know." North County. Yangqiu County. In the courtyard of the Li family's old residence. Li Mu touched the back of his head and looked at the figure standing in the courtyard in confusion. He asked, "Your Majesty, aren't we going back to Fairy's capital?" He thought the Empress would bring him back to Fairy's capital directly. However, the Empress asked him to bring her to Yangqiu County. She even insisted on visiting his ancestral residence. Zhou Yi said indifferently, "What's the rush? It's not easy to come out. We'll go back in a few days." Li Mu continued to ask, "Your Majesty, you're not going to court?" Zhou Yi looked at him and asked, "Do you feel uncomfortable being alone with me?" Li Mu smiled apologetically and said, "Not at all. I couldn't ask for more." As the Empress, she had not even left Fairy's capital. It was not bad to take this opportunity to let her see her empire with her own eyes. She was the one who took the initiative. It was not Li Mu who seduced her and made her ignore the imperial court. Although they both made the emperor not attend court, he did not have the warmth of a hibiscus tent, nor did he have the pleasure of attending banquets. He was fundamentally different from Yang Guifei. Zhou Yi looked around and asked, "You grew up here?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes." Zhou Yi continued to look around, but Li Mu's thoughts were elsewhere. Although the mission this time was extremely dangerous and he almost died in the Demon Emperor's cave, it was a daunting experience without danger. He had taken such a huge risk, but his rewards were also huge. The White Emperor's memories were forced out of the demonic corpse's body and landed in Li Mu's hands. The demonic corpse had just been born, and the space of consciousness was still blank. It suddenly received these memories, so of course it would be greatly affected. It would even think that it was the White Emperor. However, Li Mu had his own mature and complete consciousness. An unfamiliar memory would not have any effect on him. It was not the first time he digested other people's memories. With venerable thousand illusions in front, Li Mu did not take long to digest the White Emperor's memories. And the moment he obtained the White Emperor's memories, he found a way to control the White Emperor's cave and became the new master of the cave. With a thought, Li Mu's body appeared in the cave again. This place was still desolate and there was white fog everywhere. Li Mu blew and the white fog gradually dissipated. The true appearance of the White Emperor's cave appeared before his eyes for the first time. The sky here was gray. There was not a trace of cloud and there was nothing at all. The ground was brown. There were dilapidated walls, countless tombstones and demonic corpses everywhere. The Demon Emperor's palace stood alone in the center of the space. It looked like a huge tomb. The entire space was filled with dead silence. There was not even a trace of life. The Empress floated beside him and said, "This is the White Emperor's cave." Li Mu was shocked. He said in shock, "Your Majesty, how did you come in?" Zhou glanced at him and said, "I came in when I wanted to." Breaking open the space from the outside and forcefully entering an occupied cave was not something she could do with her seventh realm cultivation. She must have followed Li Mu in when he opened the cave. This also sounded the alarm for Li Mu. Even if he had the cave of a ninth realm expert, it did not mean that a seventh realm expert could not do anything to him. Although he was the owner of this cave, his strength was too low. In this cave he was still not a match for a transcendent realm expert. Zhou looked at him and said, "In front of a seventh realm expert and above, do not rashly enter the cave." Li Mu nodded seriously and said, "I understand." Then he looked at this dead silent space and asked, "Your Majesty, why is there not a trace of life here? Is this normal?" Zhou said, "It is not normal." Li Mu asked again, "Then what should a normal flask heaven space be like?" Zhou looked at him and put her hand on his shoulder. Li Mu's vision blurred, and he appeared in another space. The space was not big. It was about the size of 2 Li residences, but it was full of vitality. The sky was blue. Although there was no sun, it was as if he was under the bright sun. A few clouds dotted the sky. They were all in the shape of animals. There were butterflies, rabbits, deer. Li Mu stood on a grassland. The grass under his feet was green and shady. Sometimes there were a few small flowers. There was a stone path beside his feet. Behind the path was a simple straw hut. There were 2 gardens in front and on both sides of the hut. In the gardens, there were hundreds of flowers competing with each other. There was a faint floral fragrance in the air. In front of the path there was a small lake. The lake water was clear. A few fish swam in the water. They shook their tails and swam happily into the depths. This was the small world in the Empress's heart. Li Mu looked up at the cute 7-colored clouds in the sky. The Empress was not young, but she still had the heart of a young girl. Of course, this was not the most important point. What was important was that although this space was small, it was full of vitality. Although the Demon Emperor's cave was big, it was full of dead silence. Li Mu took a breath of the sweet air and said, "To be honest, after I retired, I wanted to live in a place like this. Of course, it would be better if the place was bigger. I have many people in my family. One small hut would not be enough." The next moment he appeared in the dead space of the Demon Emperor's cave. Li Mu looked around and asked, "Your Majesty, why did this place become like this?" The Empress looked at him and said, "When all the Flaming Pot caves were first opened, they were all dead places like this. It was the owner of the cave that gave the cave life. The White Emperor has been dead for 3,000 years. The cave cannot replenish spiritual energy from the outside. The spiritual energy in the cave will slowly dissipate. It is not strange that it has become like this. As long as you manage it well, it will recover its vitality sooner or later." Hearing the Empress say this, Li Mu was relieved. It was not easy to find a cave for free. If it was always dead and could not be lived in, then what was the use of it? After all, this would be Li Mu's home in the future. With his home in such a mess, he could not bear it for even a minute. He did as he said. First, he gathered the broken demon corpses together and burned them. Then he turned all the tombstones back into stone and leveled the ground. Last night, Li Mu discovered that there were 10 more tombstones near the square of the Demon Emperor's palace. He waved his hand and the last 10 tombstones rose from the ground. Then Li Mu discovered that under each tombstone, there was a demon corpse. He did not expect that there were 10 fish that escaped the net in the demon emperor's palace. He gathered the 10 corpses together and set them on fire again. However, these 10 demon corpses did not change at all in the true Samadhi fire. Li Mu was about to increase the firepower when Zhou Yi suddenly stretched out her hand and said, "Wait." She looked at the demon corpses that were bathing in the fire and said, "These corpses are not normal. When they were alive they should have been 7th realm or even 8th realm elites." Then she shook her head and said, "Unfortunately I do not know how to refine corpses. The corpses of such elites should be able to be refined into 6th realm corpses." Li Mu was stunned for a moment, then immediately extinguished the fire. He looked at the Empress and rubbed his hands, saying embarrassedly, "Refining corpses, I just happen to know a little." Chapter 413. Li Mu knew a lot about refining corpses. It was no exaggeration to say that no one in this world knew more about refining corpses than he did. Other than being cunning and cautious, Qian Huan also had another identity. He was the first elder of the demonic Tao's corpse sect. Refining corpses was the corpse sect's ability to make a living. Who in the 10 continents and 3 islands knew more about refining corpses than the first elder of the corpse sect? The corpse sect had always had a special status in the demonic Tao. Even those in the demonic Tao usually stayed away from the corpse sect out of respect. Their strength was ranked at the top of the 10 sects. After all, when fighting with the corpse sect, one had to be careful not only of the corpse sect themselves, but also of their corpses. Some corpse sect madmen refined corpses that were even stronger than themselves. Other than spending all day with corpses, the corpse sect disciples' favorite thing to do was to dig graves. They especially liked to rob the graves of experts. After stealing the corpses, they would use secret techniques to refine them into powerful zombies and turn them into their own corpse puppets. For the opening of the Demon Emperor's cave this time, if not for the fact that the corpse sect was too far away and could not make it in time, all the experts in their sect would have come out in full force. It could be said that the corpse sect's ability to refine corpses was the best in the 10 continents. Other than those techniques that had been lost in inheritance as time passed, all kinds of techniques were constantly improving and perfecting. The corpse refining techniques of 3,000 years ago were naturally incomparable to those of today. If the 9th realm White Emperor 3,000 years ago had Qian Huan's experience in refining corpses and used some special techniques to refine his own corpses, then the newly awakened demon corpses in the White Emperor's cave would have at least been at the 7th realm, if not the 8th realm. Including Li Mu, everyone who entered the cave would have died. Li Mu had just obtained the White Emperor's memories and only found the method to control the cave. He did not have time to go through all of it. At this moment he focused on searching and quickly found out the origins of these 10 demon corpses. These 10 corpses were the 10 great demon generals under the White Emperor. Before the White Emperor died, he buried all the demon generals and demon soldiers under him with him. Those demon soldiers would be the first to wake up when an outsider entered the cave abode. They would drain the intruder's spiritual power and weaken their strength. At the same time, they would provide the White Emperor demonic corpse with food for the awakened White Emperor demonic corpse. They would also prevent intruders with full spiritual power from causing trouble for the awakened White Emperor demonic corpse. As for the awakening of the 10 great demon generals, they would also need to consume a large amount of blood. In order to prevent them from competing with his own demon corpses for blood and affecting his resurrection, Emperor Bai chose to seal the demon generals. He planned to awaken them after his own resurrection. This way the former demon generals would be able to serve him again. Of course, he didn't expect that Li Mu would use his glib tongue to cause a zombie that had just gained consciousness to suffer from schizophrenia. In the end he forced out his memories, tore apart space and escaped. He decided to live for himself in the future. Thus, the 10 great demon generals under his command were given to Li Mu. From the White Emperor's memories, 8 of the 10 great demon generals were level 7 spirit demons, and 2 were level 8 Shen demons. Level 8 Shen demons, regardless of whether they were humans or demons, were all super strong cultivators that dominated the continent. 3,000 years ago they were just buried with someone else. Li Mu was shocked. Zhou Yi saw through his thoughts and explained, 3,000 years ago the spiritual energy between heaven and earth was much denser than it is now. It was also easier to give birth to strong cultivators. Back then there were many level 9 humans and demons. In reality, after digesting part of the White Emperor's memories, Li Mu also realized that the spiritual energy between heaven and earth today was much thinner than it was 3,000 years ago. Based on this phenomenon, It wasn't hard to guess how dense the spiritual energy was 6,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, or even in the previous epoch. It was no wonder that the number of strong cultivators was decreasing over the years even though cultivation techniques were improving. Perhaps in a few thousand years, it would be very difficult for cultivators on this continent to even advance to the middle three realms. However, all this had nothing to do with the present. Li Mu temporarily stored the 10 corpses in the Demon Emperor Palace. There was nothing in this dead space, so there was no possibility of them turning into corpses for the time being. Using blood to make the corpses develop consciousness was the lowest level of corpse refining method. If he used all kinds of treasures supplemented by the corpse nurturing formation, and refined using the corpse sex secret techniques, the White Emperor demon corpse's power would be much more than that when it awoke. However, refining them into demon corpses required a lot of preparation. Li Mu couldn't gather all the materials at the moment, so he needed to plan at length. His main task now was to remodel the Demon Emperor's cave abode. In the past 3,000 years, the ownerless Demon Emperor's cave abode was completely isolated from the outside world. This was the reason for the dead silence in this space. The first thing Li Mu had to do was to reconnect the cave abode with the outside world, allowing the spiritual energy and the power of heaven and earth from the outside world to gush in. This was the first step to restoring life to the Demon Emperor's cave abode. Li Mu's second step was to tear down the Demon Emperor Palace and the square in front of the palace. This huge building stood there alone like a huge tomb. And that was originally the White Emperor's tomb. Li Mu felt that it was inauspicious, so he quickly razed it to the ground. In addition, he also opened up a small lake in the cave abode, drawing in running water from the Bay of Clearwater, and brought in the fish and prawns in the water. While he was at it, he also moved Suhi's small house by the water into the cave abode. The Empress was very happy to plant flowers and grass. She bought flower seeds from outside and planted a huge garden by the lake. With a wave of her sleeve, the lifeless ground became green like a cushion. She also used the leftover peach pits from the two of them to grow a peach forest in the distance. The saplings quickly broke through the ground, grew rapidly, and bloomed white and red flowers. The cave abode looked brand new, but it still lacked some life. Thus, Li Mu caught some birds and a few rabbits from the forest. The grass had a few more white embellishments, the water was filled with fish and prawns, and the forest was filled with the fragrance of flowers. The sky was empty, so he pinched a few white clouds and floated in the sky. Zhou looked at the clouds in the sky in the shape of various animals. She glanced at Li Mu and said, "Childish." Looking at the small space that the two of them had opened up together, Li Mu felt a sense of accomplishment. However, for the people of the North County, there were too many strange things happening around them these few days. First, the water level of the Gulf of Clearwater had inexplicably dropped by half. Then, the number of mountains in the vicinity had also decreased. The originally lush forest on the mountain had become barren overnight, as if someone had dug it out from the roots. Some people reported this strange matter to the government. After the government sent people to investigate, they couldn't find anything. In the end, they could only leave it as it was. Inside the Heavenly Flask cave abode, Li Mu lay on the grass beside the lake. He looked at the few wooden houses by the lake and felt the breeze from the lake. His entire person fell into an ethereal state. This originally dead cave abode had been turned into a paradise by him and the Empress. In the future, there would be no need to find another place. In this place, isolated from the rest of the world, he could cultivate in peace. When he was lonely, he could leave the cave abode and travel the world. Wasn't this beautiful? Zhou stood by the lake. The breeze moved the hair in front of her forehead. She reached out and combed a few strands of hair. She asked, "How many people do you have in your family? Why did you build so many houses here?" Li Mu said, "I built a few more. Sooner or later I will need them. Even if I don't live in them myself, it will be easy to arrange if a guest comes. Your Majesty, do you want to pick one? In the future, if your Majesty is bored in the palace, you can come visit me." Zhou didn't stand on ceremony with Li Mu. She pointed at the house closest to the flower bed and said, "I want this one." The Empress was already adding furniture to her house. Dao Zhong was chasing birds in the forest. Li Mu sat cross-legged on the grass. He stretched out his hand and a simple page floated in his hand. This was the ultimate goal of everyone who entered the Demon Emperor's cave abode. Taoism called it the Tao page and the demon race called it the Heavenly Book. 3,000 years ago, the White Emperor passed down the demon race's orthodoxy through this page of the Heavenly Book. Li Mu closed his eyes and sank his consciousness into the page. In the next moment he came to a white world. This wasn't the first time he had experienced this. Li Mu closed his eyes and began to recite the clear heart chant. He didn't know how many times he recited it. When he opened his eyes again, the white fog in front of him had disappeared. His body was in a strange space. Li Mu sat cross-legged on the ground. The sky was filled with all kinds of huge figures. However, they weren't the monsters that Li Mu had seen in the pages of the Fulu school. The figures above his head were all monsters that Li Mu was familiar with. There were giant snakes that were thousands of feet long, giant bears that were hundreds of feet tall, giant wolves, and so on. There were more than 100 types of monsters. Each of them exuded an incomparably powerful aura. Li Mu looked around. He didn't see the monsters that he had seen before. Finally, he looked at a giant snake. In an instant, his vision blurred. He suddenly found himself floating in the air. He looked down and saw the body of a giant snake twisting and turning below. He himself had actually turned into that giant snake. At the same time, some information suddenly appeared in Li Mu's mind. Li Mu quickly realized that this was the cultivation method of the snake clan. Monsters were different from humans. Their monster body structures were different. Although they could cultivate by inhaling and exhaling spirit chi, each race had their own cultivation method that was most suitable for them. If they cultivated using a cultivation method that was suitable for them, they could achieve twice the results with half the effort. They could also unleash their full strength. However, before Li Mu had time to experience it, the giant snake let out a roar and flew up into the sky. At this moment, although Li Mu had the vision of the giant snake, he couldn't control its body. He could only continue to rise with the giant snake as if he wanted to fly with the snake into the sky. However, the higher the snake flew, the greater the resistance it encountered. Finally, it was suspended somewhere in the void, unable to take another step. Bang! The giant snake's body coiled up. It slammed its head into the sky, but it quickly fell back down. Bang! 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 It slammed into the sky again and again, falling down again and again. Its head was broken and bleeding, but it still didn't look back. Boom! When it slammed into the sky for the last time, it burned out all the monster power in its body. Its body exploded into a mass of flesh and blood. At the same time, Li Mu's consciousness rapidly fell. As if he had fallen in his sleep, Li Mu's body twitched on the grass in the White Emperor cave. He suddenly opened his eyes. His forehead was full of sweat and he was panting heavily. Chapter 4:14. Zhou Yi stood beside Li Mu and threw him a handkerchief. She asked, "What did you see?" Li Mu wiped his sweat with the handkerchief and gulped. He said, "Demons, many powerful demons." With the knowledge that Li Mu gained from Emperor Bai's memories, it was not difficult to determine that the demons in the Heavenly Book were all Ninth Realm heavenly demons. Although he was not sure if the scene in the Heavenly Book had really happened, the scene of the giant snake breaking through the sky left an unforgettable memory in Li Mu. Li Mu looked up at the sky. Although he often rode the wind and rode the clouds, he only flew 1,000 feet to 1,000 feet. He had never tried to fly to the highest point. In this world there were suns, moons, and stars. All kinds of phenomena showed that the ground under their feet was also a sphere. In principle, if they kept flying upwards, they should reach outer space. However, Li Mu had never seen any records of this. He looked at the Empress and asked, "Your Majesty, what is above the sky?" Zhou Yi said calmly, "You will know when you see it for yourself." After saying that, she put her hand on Li Mu's shoulder. The next moment, the two left the cave and appeared in the real world. Zhou Yi grabbed Li Mu's shoulder and flew into the sky. Li Mu looked down and saw the ancestral home under his feet becoming smaller. Soon he could see the full view of Yangqiu County. The people in carriages in the city were like ants. Soon they were above the clouds. Standing here and looking down, all one could see were clouds and mist. The surrounding air was extremely thin and the temperature was extremely low. Mortals who had never cultivated before wouldn't even be able to last the time it took to brew a cup of tea here. The Empress's hand was still on his shoulder. A warm feeling spread from her palm. Li Mu's discomfort quickly disappeared without a trace. Roughly estimating that they had flown up about 10,000 feet, Zhou Yi looked up and said, "If we go up, we will reach the 9 heavens hurricane layer." She grabbed Li Mu and ascended another 1,000 feet. As if crossing a certain boundary, Li Mu suddenly felt the pressure on his body multiply. The temperature here dropped drastically, and Li Mu had to channel his spiritual power to resist the cold. At the same time, there seemed to be a biting cold wind blowing from all directions. As the wind blew on his body, besides bringing about the cold, it also made his body feel like it was being cut by a knife. Li Mu even felt like his primordial spirit was about to be blown out of his body. Only when the Empress unleashed a protective barrier that enveloped the two of them did this feeling gradually disappear. The Empress led Li Mu upwards, and the protective shield around them began to deform. After 10,000 meters, the Empress slowly came to a stop. The higher we go, the stronger the astral winds are. With my cultivation base, I can only escort you up to this point. At this moment, the protective shield was already trembling slightly. Li Mu guessed that even a 6th realm cultivator would not be able to withstand the gales here. Further up, there would definitely be areas where even 7th realm cultivators would have to stop. It was almost impossible to fly into outer space with just one's physical body. The two of them were about to descend when they suddenly saw a golden light shining in the distance. In the 9 heavens astral wind layer, one could not fly as fast as when they were close to the ground. Zhou led Li Mu for the time it took to brew a cup of tea before they reached the golden light. In front of Li Mu's eyes, a monk in a robe appeared. The monk floated in the 9 heavens astral wind layer, allowing the astral winds to blow over his body. The biting cold astral winds blew from all directions, and the monk's robes fluttered in the wind. However, his body remained as still as a mountain, emitting a faint glow in the 9 heavens astral wind layer. Li Mu was secretly shocked at the sight of this. The astral winds here were extremely fierce. If a Dongshan cultivator was exposed here, he would probably lose his physical body immediately. This monk could withstand the 9 heavens astral wind with just his body. How strong must his physical body be? As the two of them approached, the old monk slowly opened his eyes and looked at the Empress. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes as he asked, "Are you the Empress of the Great Zhou?" Naturally, the Empress could not be the one to introduce herself. As the Empress's #1 lackey, Li Mu spoke on her behalf. "Yes, Your Majesty. May I ask for the Great Master's Dharma name and where you cultivate?" The old monk braved the astral winds and put his palms together. He said, "Amitba. Greetings, Your Majesty. I am Kong Ming, an old monk who wanders the world." Li Mu sized him up a few times and asked, "Grand Master, are you cultivating in this 9 heavens astral wind layer?" The old monk smiled and said, "I have nothing to do, so I came up to polish my muscles and bones." It was the first time Li Mu heard of using the 9 heavens astral wind to polish one's muscles and bones. Although Buddhism cultivated the body, ordinary monks could not withstand it. This old monk was probably in the Prajna realm of Buddhism, a 7th realm master like the Empress Shenjizi. While Li Mu was sizing up the old monk was also sizing up Li Mu. As he looked, a strange light suddenly appeared in his eyes and he said, "Young benefactor, you are fated with Buddhism. If you convert to Buddhism, you will definitely become a holy monk in the future." The Empress looked at him indifferently and said coldly, "Recite your sutras." This was the first sentence she said to the old monk and also the only sentence. After saying this, she grabbed Li Mu's shoulder, and the two of them descended rapidly. In a few breaths' time, Li Mu stood on the ground again. The rapid descent made him feel dizzy. His body swayed, and only by supporting the Empress did he not fall. Li Mu felt that although his body had returned to the ground, his soul was still in the sky. After calming himself down, Li Mu immediately let go of the Empress and said helplessly, "Your Majesty, don't be so fast next time." I can't take it," Zhou said. "I know." In the next few days, the two of them spent a few more days in their own world. With the Empress's speed, it would take less than an hour to go from the North County to the divine capital, but she didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. She flew slowly with Li Mu along the way. When they reached a town, they would go down to rest, see the local customs, try the local snacks, and shop for some local specialties. 10 days passed, and they hadn't even finished half of the journey. Li Mu was quite anxious at first, but seeing that he wasn't. He treated it as accompanying her on a private tour. For the Empress, who had never left the divine capital before, the outside world was full of novelty. During this time, Li Mu tried many times to comprehend the heavenly book, possessed various monsters, and obtained many cultivation methods of the monster race. What Bai Di had comprehended back then was far less than what Li Mu had comprehended. The cultivation method that he had comprehended and passed down to the monster race was actually only one kind, and it was the cultivation method of the tiger race. However, he had made some improvements on this foundation so that all monsters could cultivate according to this method, but it was far from being able to unleash the special abilities of the various races. If Li Mu passed down the cultivation method of the monster race that he knew to the corresponding monster race, so that each of the major monster races would have their own cultivation method, the strength of the monster race would definitely rise to another level. Of course, this was tantamount to aiding the enemy, and Li Mu wouldn't nurture the enemy. Unfortunately, he didn't find the cultivation method of the fox race. Although the fox race was also a monster, their cultivation method was its own system. When the nine-tailed fox appeared, all the other monsters would retreat. Their cultivation method should be top-notch. Li Mu guessed that the heavenly book in the hands of the Lord of Illusions might contain the secret of the fox race. He wondered if there was a chance for Xiao Bai to get it. In addition, there was another matter that caused great doubt in Li Mu's heart. In the space where the page was, no matter what kind of monster race it was, their final choice would be the end of the sky. It was as if there was something there that was attracting them. For this reason, these monster race experts were even willing to give up their lives. Li Mu knew nothing about this. At the end of the sky, above the nine heavens hurricane, what exactly was attracting them? Perhaps only they knew. Even Li Mu couldn't find the answer from Emperor Bai's memories. Similarly, the enormous monster he saw in the talisman puppet sex Dao page was also an unsolved mystery in his heart. After wandering outside for more than half a month, Li Mu and the Empress finally returned to Shendu. The officials were notified that tomorrow's morning court would be held as usual. It seemed that His Majesty's seclusion had ended. Cultivators of the seventh realm could easily go into seclusion for months or even years. Half a month of seclusion was nothing. Surprisingly, Li Mu, who had disappeared for a long time, also appeared at this morning court. The officials didn't know what he had been doing. They only guessed that he was out on a mission with the consecrators. Someone tried to inquire through the consecrators department but didn't find anything. In the consecrators department, the sloppy Taoist priest had his hands behind his back. He looked around at everyone and said, "Remember this. You didn't see or hear anything. Don't talk nonsense when you go out. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless." After returning to the Changel Palace, Li Mu gave the black fox tail that he had plundered from Phantom Princess to Xiao Bai. The weapon in her hand was given to her by Li Mu. Without a doubt, the black fox tail could only unleash its greatest power in the hands of the Fox clan. Xiao Bai loved this new magic treasure very much. Li Mu also took out an elixir that he had plundered from the Demon Palace. With the help of the Empress, Xiao Bai successfully evolved 5 tails. In terms of cultivation, both Li Mu and the Empress could only help her up to this point. She had to complete every step on her own. Li Mu thought of an important matter. He called Xiao Bai in front of him and asked, "Does the Heavenly Fox clan always seek revenge and repay kindness?" Xiao Bai nodded solemnly. Li Mu asked again, "What if there is a person who has both a favor and a grudge against you?" Xiao Bai was stunned for a moment. She didn't seem to expect this situation. She said in confusion, "Well, I don't know." At this time Wan, who had been eavesdropping, trotted over and said, I know. First, I will repay his kindness with my body. Then I will have a bunch of children with him. Every day I will beat his children for revenge." Chapter 4:15. "You're such a clever girl." Li Mu knocked on Wan's head. Looking at her aggrieved look, he could not help but reach out and rub her head. The Heavenly Fox clan clearly distinguished between kindness and hatred. Kindness was kindness, hatred was hatred. It was impossible for them to forget their kindness and hatred with a bang. Moreover, Li Mu already had a fox at home. He had never thought of having a baby with a wild fox outside. As a member of the Heavenly Fox clan, he was a little curious about Little White's choice in this matter. He looked at Little White again and asked, "Little White, if I had a grudge with you before I saved you, what would you have done?" Little White said without hesitation, "Benefactor, how could you have a grudge with me?" Li Mu said, "This is just a hypothesis." Little White shook her head and said firmly, "There is no such hypothesis." It was indeed difficult for Little White to imagine this matter. Li Mu did not make things difficult for her. After reviewing a few memorials on the table, he returned to the harem to rest. Although he said he was resting, he was actually digesting his gains this time. Whether it was the page of the Heavenly Book or the White Emperor's memory, they were not things that Li Mu could completely digest in a short time. In these days he had already learned more than 10 cultivation methods of the demon race. He could refine elixirs that could help demons increase their cultivation and break through realms. He also knew many demonic skills. As long as he had enough time, strengthening the demon race was just around the corner. It was a pity that he was a human. He had the abilities of the demon race, but he had nowhere to use them. This feeling was not good. He temporarily suppressed the feelings in his chest. Li Mu calmed down and began to silently chant the Heart Sutra. In the early stages of cultivation, Li Mu envied the strength of Xuandu's physical body and wanted to cultivate both Buddhism and Taoism. In cultivation, Taoism cultivated the primordial spirit and Buddhism cultivated the physical body. Ordinary people could only choose one, but when Li Mu encountered a choice, he would usually consider whether he could have both. Later he gradually realized that just cultivating one had almost exhausted all his energy. The idea of cultivating both Buddhism and Taoism could only be put on hold indefinitely. Now he had already taken all the shortcuts he could take in Haoyan Taoism. If he wanted to go further, he needed hard work and opportunities. It was not something that could be done overnight. However, he could restart his previous plan. If his Buddhist cultivation could keep up, he would not have been defeated by Phantasmagoria in the White Emperor Cave. In order to avoid similar situations in the future, he had to make up for his shortcomings as soon as possible. The first 3 realms of Buddhist cultivation only required diligent recitation of sutras. Stimulated by Phantasmagoria, Li Mu began to cultivate diligently. For half a day he locked himself in his room and did not come out. There was still some time before Xian Jizi's disciple recruitment ceremony. Li Qing was in seclusion, so he was in no hurry to go to White Cloud Mountain. This period of time should be enough for him to achieve a breakthrough in his Buddhist Dharma. During dinner, the Empress asked him what he was doing in the room for so long. Li Mu answered honestly. Zhou Yi asked, "Are you going to cultivate both Buddhism and Taoism?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Both Buddhism and Taoism have their own strengths and weaknesses. If I cultivate at the same time, I can learn from each other. Anyway, it's difficult for me to make a big breakthrough in my cultivation. It's better to cultivate Buddhism first." This was one of the reasons. The other reason was that he was stimulated by Phantasmagoria. As a fox, she could cultivate both demon Dharma and Taoism to a high level. Li Mu was not willing to be behind Phantasmagoria. Although Phantasmagoria was the second generation of the demon Dharma, Li Mu's own conditions were not bad. Not to mention the talent of the pure yang body, he also had the Fugu school as his backer. At the same time, he was also holding the Empress's thigh tightly. There was no reason for him to lose to a fox. Zhou Yi nodded and said, "Since you've made up your mind, this is for you." She waved her hand and a golden light flew out of her hand. Li Mu caught it and found that it was a stone about half the size of a palm. It was emitting a faint golden light. The stone was a little heavy, and Li Mu soon found that the golden light emitted from the stone was the light of Buddha. He seemed to realize something and asked, "Is this a Buddhist saraira?" The Empress nodded and said, "This was left behind by an eminent monk of the Heart sect after he passed away. At that time, in order to build temples in various counties, they gave the saraira of an eminent monk to the imperial court. The Buddhist saraira was a treasure left behind by an eminent monk with profound dharma after he passed away. In the saraira there was their life's spiritual power. If a mortal had this treasure, they would be immune to all diseases and demons and ghosts. At the same time, this was a rare material. After it was ground into powder, it could replace some precious natural treasures and be used to write the holy talisman. Of course, to a Buddhist cultivator, the saraira of an eminent monk was even more useful. The saraira was the condensation of the eminent monk's life's dharma. Before they passed away, they would condense their life's spiritual power into a saraira and leave it to their descendants. This was also a kind of dharma inheritance. As long as their descendants absorbed the spiritual power in the saraira, they would be able to avoid years or even decades of bitter cultivation. However, it was impossible to retain all the spiritual power in the saraira. It was already rare for an eminent monk to leave 10% or 20% of his spiritual power and condense it into a saraira before he passed away. Even so, to a low-level cultivator, it was a great fortune. If it were someone else, Li Mu might be polite with such a precious gift. However, there was no need for any extra politeness between him and the Empress. Li Mu could sell his life for her and accept such a precious gift from her peacefully. After passing away, the eminent monk who could leave behind a saraira was at least in the 7th realm. Even if this saraira only contained 10% of his spiritual power, it was still a huge amount for Li Mu. With this item, Li Mu's dharma cultivation improved rapidly. In just a few days he broke through to the 3rd realm. He was not far from the 4th realm, the golden body. If he absorbed all the spiritual power in this saraira, it was inevitable that he would cultivate the golden body. However, he could not be too hasty. Li Mu's improvement was too fast. He needed to completely stabilize his current realm before he could try to break through. His physical body did not seem to have any changes. However, when Li Mu used the Bai sword to gently slash it, only a white mark appeared on his arm. He channeled his spiritual power and slashed it again. Only then did a shallow cut appear on his arm. However, the wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It quickly disappeared without a trace. This was only in the third realm. When he cultivated the golden body, combined with the fighting formula, he would be able to fight in close combat or from a distance. His strength would no longer have an obvious shortcoming. The problem that needed to be solved now was that although Li Mu's spiritual power had caught up with the eminent monk Saraira, it had not completely merged with his physical body. For Buddhist cultivators who cultivated step by step, their spiritual power was hidden in their physical body. Their physical body grew stronger as their spiritual power grew. Li Mu's spiritual power grew too fast. Much of it was still wandering in his physical body. He could not unleash the full power of his physical body. The fastest way to merge the two was to fight. Unfortunately, Li Mu did not have any friends who cultivated Buddhism. Although Mr. Mei and Shangguanli had enough cultivation, their bodies could not take more than a few punches. The Empress could fight him in close combat, but the difference in their strength was too great. It could not be used as a training ground. Moreover, Li Mu did not want to be ravaged by the Empress again. He did not want to personally experience her strength every day. It would cause him to have strange and embarrassing dreams at night. Li Mu thought hard. Suddenly, a light flashed through his mind. He remembered the monk that he and the Empress met in the Nine Heavens atmosphere. The Nine Heavens atmosphere was a natural place to train one's body. Every 10 feet higher, the atmosphere's power would increase by 1 level. One could choose the position and height according to the intensity of the atmosphere's power. They were constantly challenging their limits. When their strength increased, they could challenge higher positions and continue to challenge new limits. 2 hours later, in the Nine Heavens atmosphere above Shendu, at the bottom of the atmosphere, 2 figures sat cross-legged some distance apart. Li Mu's body was completely exposed to the astral wind. He allowed the astral wind to hit him. Not far away, Shangguanli used his dermic powers to prop up a shield, trying his best to keep the astral wind out of his body. 2 hours ago, when Li Mu proposed his idea to the Empress, Shangguanli insisted on following. Whether it was to train one's body or to hone one's spiritual power, this place was a natural treasure. It could constantly squeeze the limits of one's body and spiritual power. Every time one broke through the atmosphere, they would enter a new world. But this process was not easy. The temperature here was extremely low. When the atmosphere blew on one's body, it was like a knife. One's body was under great pressure. If it were a mortal here, it was equivalent to being dismembered at every moment. Li Mu's body emitted a faint golden light in the cold wind. When the atmosphere blew, the golden light on his body dimmed. Soon it lit up again. This cycle repeated. Under this extreme pressure, the Buddhist spiritual power in his body began to merge with his body. At a certain moment, he opened his eyes and glanced at Shangguanli. He found that she was also bitterly holding on. Shangguanli and Li Mu were the same. Both of their cultivations had been greatly improved through shortcuts. Whether it was experience or the purity of their spiritual power, they were not as good as a true manifestation realm cultivator. The atmosphere of the Nine Heavens was a rare cultivation treasure for them. However, even at the bottom of the atmosphere was not weak. Li Mu and Shangguanli resisted for 15 minutes before they both reached their limits. Zhou Yi waved her sleeves and brought the two of them out of the atmosphere and back to the palace. At this moment, Li Mu and Shangguanli's hair was covered with a layer of white frost. The atmosphere was cold and penetrated to the bone. If one stayed for too long, even a cultivator would be frozen to death. Shangguanli glanced at Li Mu. The two of them had experienced life and death together and had been through the atmosphere together. They could be said to have gone through thick and thin together. The distance between them was quickly pulled closer. She looked at Li Mu and took the initiative to speak, which was rare for her. She said, "The atmosphere is still cold. It will last for a long time. Find a warm place and use your spiritual power to expel the cold." With that, Little White and Wan ran out of the palace. When they saw Li Mu's pale face from the cold, they both showed a pained expression. Wan held Li Mu's hand and blew on it. She placed it on her face and asked, "Young master, is it warmer now?" Little White held Li Mu's other hand and urged, "Benefactor, why is your body so cold? Let's go back to the room and warm your body." Shangguanli watched as Li Mu was escorted away by the two girls. She stood on the spot for a long time, put her palms together, breathed a few times and then hugged her body tightly. Chapter 416. Mr. Mei looked at Shangguanli from afar and sighed. "Now do you know the benefits of having someone by your side?" Shangguanli's body was still trembling slightly. She said lightly, "That's all there is to it." Mr. Mei shook his head. "You're already so cold, yet you're still so stubborn. Girl, come, let me hug you and warm you up. Although the astral winds were bone-chilling with Wan Wan and Xiao Bai's blanket, it was warm to the heart. It was so warm that it was a little depraved. When he thought about how Li Qing was cultivating in seclusion while he was here, enjoying Wan Wan and Xiao Bai warming his bed, Li Mu felt that he was really too depraved. After some self-reflection, he felt that he could not go on like this. He pulled his arms out of Wan Wan and Xiao Bai's embrace, sat cross-legged on the bed, and continued to comprehend the heavenly book. At this time, after many days of fermenting, the news of the demon emperor Baidi's cave abode had finally spread. The 6 Taoist sects, the 4 demonic sects, the demon kings, and even the great Zhou court had all participated in the fight for the demon emperor's cave abode. Although most people did not know the final result, one could imagine that with so many factions and countless experts, there was only one heavenly book and one Baidi's inheritance. No matter who obtained it in the end, there would definitely be an extremely fierce fight. During this period of time, the actions of the various large forces all proved this point. Within the demon nation, the bear tribe, the snake tribe, the wolf tribe, and the leopard tribe suddenly formed an alliance. Before this, there were many conflicts between the various demon kings because of territorial disputes, and there were no signs of an alliance. After the 4 demon kings formed an alliance, some news also spread within their demon nation. It was said that in the fight for the demon emperor's cave, the 4 demon kings had suffered heavy losses. The demon generals that they had sent out were almost completely annihilated. In order to avoid being swallowed up by the other demon kings after their strength was greatly damaged, they had no choice but to form an alliance. As for the demon Dao demon sect in the demon nation, they had always been arrogant and had constantly swallowed up the surrounding small demon tribes to expand their own forces. However, in recent days, they had suddenly become much more well-behaved. Not only had their forces shrunk, but the demons that used to rely on the demon sect as their backing had also become terrified. This also confirmed some of the rumors that had spread from the territories of the Bear King and the Snake King. It was said that the demon sect had sent 5 5th-level demon generals into the White Emperor cave, but none of them had returned. The demon sect head elder had lost half of his capable subordinates. It was no wonder that the demon sect had suddenly become obedient. At the same time, in the faraway Yudu Ghost region, Soul Sect, the 2 soul shadows stood in Soul Palace and looked at each other. 2 years ago, the Soul Sect had a 6th-level Great Elder, and below him were the 10 Kings of Hell. Each of their cultivations were above the 5th level. Since Chu Jiang of Gojoseon had died in the North County, King Wuguan, Emperor Song, and the Great Elder Nether Saint had all died in the hands of Li Mu. The Soul Sect's strength had been greatly damaged. In this fight for the Demon Emperor's cave, King Qingguang had sent out 5 Kings of Hell. In the end, not a single one of the 5 Kings of Hell had returned. The once glorious Soul Sect had countless experts. Now, only King Qingguang, who had been forcefully raised to the 6th level, and the King of Chakravarti of the 10 Kings of Hell were left. They had completely fallen to the bottom of the 10 sects. If other forces in the Ghost region had encountered such a setback, the surrounding Ghost Kings who were eyeing them covetously would have been unable to sit still. The only outcome for them was to be swallowed up and divided up. However, no matter how weak the Soul Sect was, it was still one of the 10 sects of the Demon Dao. With the giant tree of the Demon Dao behind them, no forces in the Ghost region dared to swallow them up. The main reason was that they themselves could not accept the decline of the Soul Sect. King Qingguang said in a deep voice, "We must recruit some experts as soon as possible. Otherwise the Soul Sect will only exist in name." The King of Chakravarti shook his head. The 5th-level spirits of the Ghost region have already been absorbed by various forces. We can't snatch them from them. The major forces in the Ghost region did not dare to touch the Soul Sect because they were afraid of the Demon Dao. However, if the Soul Sect came knocking on their door, they would not be polite. With the Soul Sect's current strength, they could not afford to offend anyone. King Qingguang said, "Not all the spirits have joined the major forces. I heard that there is a female spirit in the West Mountain who has just become a spirit. A year ago, the east of the May Mountain was also occupied by a 5th-level soul cultivator." The King of Chakravarti thought for a while and said, "Great Elder said that Madame Lin of the West Mountain and the powerful existence of the May Mountain." King Qingguang said, "It's them." The King of Chakravarti shook his head. Half a year ago, King Taishan was ordered by the saint to invite Madame Lin, but she rejected him. The one in the May Mountain is extremely powerful. King Pingdeng and I went to invite her, but we did not even get to see her face. King Pingdeng was almost killed by her because he spoke rudely. If I did not mention the name of the saint at the critical moment, the 2 of us would not have made it back. King Qingguang frowned and asked. The two of you almost died before you even got to see her face. Could it be that the soul cultivator has already reached the 6th level? No. The king of Chakravarti said. Her cultivation is not much stronger than ours, but her remarkable ability is really terrifying. It is simply unheard of, King Qingguang asked. What kind of remarkable ability? The king of Chakravarti said, she can make snow fall in a 10-mile radius. The snow is bone-chilling and can harm souls. She can also control lightning, which is very effective against us. King Qingguang's eyes flashed as he said, she does have some ability. If I can subdue her, wouldn't I have another helper by my side? I definitely can't let this girl go. However, before subduing her, I need to go meet Madame Lin. As soon as he finished speaking, his body turned into a cloud of gray mist and left the Hall of Souls, flying towards the west. At the same time, a certain matter caused a stir in the demonic path. The reward for the second arrest of Li Mu by the Lord of Illusions was even more generous than the first. Anyone who could capture this person alive would become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions and wield the heavenly tomes for a year. After all, the previous reward for Li Mu was only to guide his cultivation and help him comprehend the heavenly tomes once. To become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions and be given a year to comprehend the heavenly tomes. This was not a recruitment of a disciple, but a recruitment of a son-in-law. This benefit did not seem like it was for an outsider. Everyone knew that the Lord of Illusions had a beautiful and talented daughter. If one could become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions, there was a high chance, no, a 90% chance, that one could marry the Lord of Illusions and become a family with the Lord of Illusions. As soon as this news spread, it caused a heated discussion in the demonic path. What did that Li Mu do to make the Lord of Illusions put a bounty on him? This is the second time he has put a bounty on him. Did he sleep with the Lord of Illusions' daughter? The Lord of Illusions loves Princess Illusions very much. I think it's possible. No, I must kill Li Mu. It's not to become the personal disciple of the Lord of Illusions or to comprehend the heavenly tomes. The main thing is that I can't tolerate him sullying Princess Illusions. Forget it. The Lord of Illusions said that he only wants him alive. Why is it so much harder to capture him alive than dead? The Lord of Illusions' bounty for Li Mu was not only limited to the demonic path. No matter if it was the demon race, ghost race or human race, as long as they could bring Li Mu to him alive, they would be rewarded by the Lord of Illusions. As for why the Lord of Illusions only wanted him alive, everyone speculated. In the end, they all agreed that it was because Li Mu had abandoned Princess Illusions and angered the Lord of Illusions. The Lord of Illusions must have planned to use extremely cruel methods to torture him after capturing him alive. In the Chengel Palace, Zhou Yi was holding a secret report from the demon sect. He looked at Li Mu and said with interest, "The spies from the demon sect said that you made the Lord of Illusions' daughter pregnant. The Lord of Illusions has put a bounty on you in the Zhu continent. The person who captures you alive will become his personal disciple and will have 1 year to comprehend a page of the heavenly tomes. When did the thing between you and that fox happen?" Wan was so shocked that her mouth was wide open. She didn't even realize that the candy in her hand had fallen out. Xiaobai was in a daze. Thinking that her benefactor already had another fox outside, she suddenly felt that her life was bleak. Could it be that her benefactor's love for her would disappear? Chapter 417. A bunch of nonsense. After Li Mu reacted, his face revealed a look of anger as he said, "Who sent back this false information? That person is not responsible at all. It's fine if it's just a fabricated rumor, but if this is an important battle report, how many things will be delayed and how much damage will be caused to the imperial court? His bonus for this year is gone." Zhou Yi put down the report and lightly said, "This matter has already spread throughout the entire demonic path. Anyone can find out about it." Li Mu raised his head to look at her and said, "Your Majesty, please believe this subject. This subject is loyal to my wife and is not." No matter how thick-skinned Li Mu was, he could not say the word loyal. He could not even say promiscuous. Otherwise, where would he place Li Qing, Little White and Wan? He lightly coughed and said, "This subject is loyal to your Majesty. How can I have an affair with a demonic path witch? It's even more impossible to impregnate her. This is a rumor, a scandal. This subject has Little White by his side. How can I provoke other foxes?" Little White's face revealed a bashful expression. She felt that her benefactor's love for her had returned. Zhou Yi flicked her finger and a flame flew out, burning the report to ashes. She said, all right. This emperor believes you. Go back to work. Li Mu walked out of Chang'e Palace and slowly exhaled. This heavenly lord of 10,000 illusions was truly endless. Not to mention the demonic path people, even Li Mu himself was moved by the bounty this time. Li Mu was not interested in becoming the direct disciple of the myriad illusion heaven monarch or marrying Phantasmagoria. However, Li Mu was very curious about the page of the heavenly book in the myriad illusion heaven monarch's hands. It was said that the complete heavenly book had a total of 24 pages. It contained the great Tao of heaven and earth. Li Mu had comprehended 2 of the pages and obtained the inheritance of the talisman Tao and the demonic Tao. At the same time, the images left behind in the heavenly book also left a deep impression on Li Mu. What were those giant beasts? Why did the demonic cultivators bang their heads against the sky? What other mysteries were there in the other heavenly books? As the most legendary treasure in the world, there were too many legends about the heavenly book. However, without a doubt, once one comprehended the complete heavenly book, one would be able to see the great Tao of this world and uncover the mysteries of the ancient times. These 2 things attracted Li Mu much more than Phantasmagoria. He wondered if the heaven monarch of myriad illusions would keep his promise and allow him to comprehend the page of the heavenly book in his hands if he surrendered himself and brought Li Mu back alive. Li Mu thought about it carefully and felt that this possibility was not big, so he completely dispelled this idea. 100,000 Great Mountains, where the Mirage faction was located. The myriad illusions lord handed a simple page to Phantasmagoria and said, "If you can't comprehend more, then don't force yourself." Phantasmagoria nodded and said, "I understand." She took the page and sank her consciousness into it. Soon she appeared in an empty space. This space was filled with a boundless fog. She could only see a few steps away from her. The fog would occasionally tumble as if something was flying past at high speed. Phantasmagoria calmed her heart and focused her mind. She tried to use her mind to disperse the fog. The fog in front of her seemed to have thinned a little. A white figure suddenly passed through the fog. It was a white fox with 2 tails. Phantasmagoria's gaze swept past the fox demon and continued to disperse the fog. This page of the heavenly book contained the inheritance of the Fox clan. Although the Fox clan was also demonic, their cultivation was different from that of the demonic cultivators. The ancestors of the Fox clan had opened up a completely different cultivation path for them. The weak Fox clan, when cultivated to the peak, could become the king of the demonic cultivators. They had heaven demons as subordinates and heaven dragons as mounts. However, as the heaven foxes fell one after another, no new heaven foxes were born. The Fox clan gradually declined, the fog in front of her gradually thinned. More and more fox shadows flew past Phantasmagoria's eyes. These foxes were 2-tailed, 3-tailed, 4-tailed, and one of them was 5-tailed. Phantasmagoria's face still did not reveal a satisfied expression. 3 years ago, she was able to obtain the inheritance of the 5-tailed fox demon from the heavenly book. Until now, she had not met a 6-tailed fox. Back then, her father had obtained the inheritance of the 7-tailed fox by chance. That was why he had the strength and status he had today. If she could meet a 6-tailed fox spirit and obtain its inheritance, she would be able to advance to 6-tailed at the fastest speed possible. Unfortunately, to obtain this level of inheritance besides strength, she also needed luck. The Heaven Lord of Illusions looked at Phantasmagoria, who was immersed in the heavenly book, and silently walked out of the cave. He looked at a disciple of the Mirage faction and asked, "Have you found the Demon Emperor's spiritual corpse?" The disciple shook his head and said, "Heaven Lord, we have not found any traces of it." The Heaven Lord of Illusions said calmly, "Continue to search." The heavenly book had fallen into Li Mu's hands. This was an unchangeable fact. However, possessing the heavenly book only gave one the possibility to become a powerhouse. It could not immediately make one a powerhouse. The 6 Taoist sects all had heavenly books. Their strongest powerhouses were only in the 7th realm. What's more, the heavenly book of the demon clan was useless to the human clan. However, the demon emperor's corpse was different. It was the corpse of a heavenly demon. If it was handed over to the corpse sect and refined, even if it could not restore his peak strength, it would certainly create a powerhouse in the upper realm. This was more beneficial than the heavenly book. Yingzhou bordered the northeast of the ancestral continent. There were many mountains and poisonous barriers in the territory. Although the territory was vast, there were no human countries. There were only poisonous insects and beasts everywhere. The trees and flowers that could survive here were generally highly poisonous. Very few people knew that the corpse sect of the 10 demonic sects was in Yingzhou. Among the 10 demonic sects, the corpse sect was the most repulsive. Although the soul sect and the demon sect had committed all kinds of evil, ghosts were the souls of humans, and demons were also living beings. They shared the same emotions as humans. In some novels, love between humans and ghosts or between humans and demons transcending life and death and transcending races happened from time to time. However, no one had ever written a story about humans and corpses. After all, in the eyes of most people, zombies were inhumane creatures that only knew how to suck blood and bite people. They were more terrifying than demons and ghosts. The people of the corpse sect spent all day with corpses. Just thinking about it made them shudder. Not only the righteous sects but even the demonic sects did not like the corpse sect. Their bodies were always filled with thick corpse chi, and they were always thinking about the bodies of others. If a powerhouse of the demonic sects died and his corpse was still intact, the people of the corpse sect would take the initiative to come and ask for the corpse. If a powerhouse was about to die, they would come in advance and wait to receive their corpse. They did not care about the feelings of the dying person. Therefore, in the demonic sects, the corpse sect was like a jinx. In Ingzhou, in a hollow mountain somewhere, there was a burst of shock. What? The White Patriarch's cave abode has appeared. There are countless demon corpses from 3,000 years ago inside. The White Patriarch's corpse is also inside. That's the corpse of a ninth realm powerhouse. It's something that can't be found even in a few hundred years. Why didn't you say so earlier? If I can use a ninth realm corpse as material to refine a spirit corpse in this life, even if I die, it'll be worth it. Figures sat cross-legged on the stone platform in the cave. Although they were all humans, their bodies were filled with thick corpse chi. This was not because they were about to die but because they spent all day with corpses. Below the stone platform was an extremely wide platform. On the platform, hundreds of corpses stood neatly. The entire cave was filled with corpse chi. The figures on the stone platform were all filled with regret. Refining a ninth realm demon corpse was something they did not even dare to dream of. Every corpse sect disciple saw this as their life's ultimate goal. Everyone sighed and lamented that they missed the chance to obtain a ninth realm demon corpse. I heard that many people died in the demon emperor's cave abode. It's a pity that their corpses. When are those old fellows from the various sects going to die? Wouldn't it be great if we could have a seventh realm corpse to practice on? I wonder if the great elder is really dead. It's a pity that his corpse was not left behind. Even if it's not a seventh realm corpse, a peak sixth realm corpse would suffice. With the great elder's sinister intelligence, how could he die so easily? It's not like it's the first time he died. His longest death was when he disappeared for 10 years before reappearing. Not even 2 years have passed. Who knows, he might come back on his own one day. Demon Emperor's cave abode. Li Mu looked at the 10 demon corpses in front of him, deep in thought. 3,000 years ago, the spirit chi of heaven and earth was dense and powerful cultivators were everywhere. As subordinates of the demon emperor, even the weakest of the 10 demons was at Xianjizi's current level of cultivation. If he followed the corpse sect's top-notch corpse refining techniques, he could at least refine 6th realm demon corpses. 2 of them even had hopes of reaching 7th realm. Of course, demon corpses of this level were not easy to refine. The amount of materials needed to refine them was enormous. Li Mu had asked Xianjizi and the Empress. The materials he needed could not be gathered even if Mount Baiyun and the imperial court combined. When he thought of this, Li Mu's gaze involuntarily turned to the northeast. That was the direction of Ingzhou. Very few people knew that the corpse sect's headquarters was in the deserted Ingzhou. When it came to refining corpses, the corpse sect was undoubtedly the most professional. With thousands of years of accumulation, they had all the materials Li Mu needed there. Li Mu thought for a moment, and the aura on his body suddenly changed. The Empress, who was reading a book lazily in her chair, looked up and glanced at him asking, "What are you doing?" Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about me, Your Majesty. I'm going to practice in advance." Chapter 418. The question of, "Who am I?" that the White Emperor Demon Corpse had once struggled with was actually not completely meaningless. At this moment, sitting in Changel Palace was Li Mu, the Thousand Illusions Venerable, and the Demon Emperor White Emperor. He had the memories of the Thousand Illusions Venerable and the White Emperor, knew all their secrets and knew everyone they knew. With this, he could flawlessly pretend that he had been possessed by the Thousand Illusions Venerable or the White Emperor. If he said he was the corpse sect's Grand Elder, then he was the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Compared to the Thousand Illusions Venerable being possessed, most people were more willing to believe that he had possessed someone else. Although the corpse sect was also one of the 10 demonic sects, They were not interested in anything other than tomb raiding and refining corpses. Li Mu and the Empress had worked hard to turn the Demon Emperor's cave into a paradise. The mountains were green, the water was green, and the flowers were fragrant. However, there were always 10 corpses that had been dead for 3,000 years. Every time Li Mu thought about it, he felt uncomfortable. Rather than letting them gather dust in the cave, it was better to send them to the corpse sect and let the corpse refiners help refine them. At the same time, it saved Li Mu a lot of manpower and resources. However, the premise of all this was to make them believe that Li Mu was the Thousand Illusions Venerable. It was not difficult to do this, but he did not want to expose his true identity. The art of transformation was a mystical power that only level 6 cultivators were qualified to learn. Even if Li Mu used the false appearance talisman, he could not guarantee that there would be no flaws. He closed his eyes and searched in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, his face changed. Soon he had become a stranger. This was not a Taoist mystical power but a demon technique. The false appearance mystical power was an illusory technique that was cast with spells. If it met someone with a high cultivation, they would be seen through at a glance. On the other hand, this demon technique that had been lost with the fall of the White Emperor could change one's appearance without leaving a trace. Of course, demon techniques had their advantages, but Taoist techniques also had their limitations. The Tao sect's divine ability allowed one to transform into any appearance they wished with the help of Dharma spells. Regardless of whether it was a person's face, a rock, a wooden stake, a cow, or a dog, there was nothing it could not do. Demonic arts were not so random. At most, they could change their appearance but not their figure. If they wanted to change into the appearance of anyone, they would need to cultivate to a high level. It seemed that Tao arts were stronger, but Tao arts were essentially illusions. All illusions had the risk of being seen through. As for this demonic technique, even though there were many limitations when it was executed, it would leave no traces behind after the transformation, making it difficult for others to notice. There was also the invisibility spell. The Taoist invisibility spell could hide one's body, clothes, weapons, magic treasures, all the accessories on one's body, and any external objects that the caster wanted to hide. They were both invisible, but demonic arts were not as magical. It could only hide the caster's body, hair, and skin. It did not include clothes or any other external objects. In other words, if he wanted to become invisible through demonic arts, he would have to strip naked from head to toe. This seemed to be a useless spell, but it was very difficult to completely hide one's aura and spiritual power. Once any spiritual power fluctuations were revealed, even if others couldn't see it with the naked eye, they would be able to perceive their existence. As for the invisibility spell, it was born from a certain lizard's innate divine ability. It didn't consume any spiritual power at all, so naturally, there would be no spiritual power fluctuations. Not only could it make people disappear out of thin air, but it could also integrate with any surrounding environment without any disharmony. Even a powerhouse of the upper realm wouldn't be able to discover it. Li Mu comprehended a lot of demonic arts from Baidi's memory, and he first learned these two practical ones. The art of disguise that would not be discovered by others allowed him to act with another identity without exposing himself. As for the invisibility spell, although the casting conditions were a bit awkward, in the face of a life and death crisis, or some incomparably critical moment, who would care about wearing clothes or not? Of course, with Li Mu's caution, he would not joke about his own safety without confirmation. The transformation spell would not be exposed. Li Mu had already confirmed this through the Empress. As for the other one, it was inconvenient for him to take the initiative to look for the Empress. Li Mu thought for a while and returned to his room. A moment later, Wan Wan and Xiao Bai, who were sitting cross-legged on the bed, suddenly found that the door of their room was pushed open. Xiao Bai turned her head and took a look and said in surprise, "Why is the door open? Is it the wind?" Wan Wan turned her head to look and quickly turned back and said, "It should be the wind, it's your turn. Whoever wins this game will sleep inside tonight." Li Mu walked out of Wan Wan and Xiao Bai's room. It seemed that the demonic arts from 3,000 years ago were indeed something. Xiao Bai couldn't see through it, but even Wan Wan, who had a small success in her spiritual pupils, couldn't discover him after he was invisible. On the bed in the room, Xiao Bai finished moving the chess pieces and inadvertently looked at Wan Wan and asked in confusion, "What's wrong with you? Why is your color so red?" After coming out of their room, Li Mu's confidence increased a little. He was barefoot, and using the demonic arts that originated from the cat race, he walked silently. He walked to the entrance of Chang'e Palace and saw Shangguan Li, who was standing guard outside. He reached out and waved his hand in front of her eyes, but Shangguan Li didn't react at all. Even she couldn't discover him. Li Mu became bolder and walked into Changle Palace. The empress was reading a book. At this moment, there was no one in the palace, and she was lying on the dragon throne in an even more languid posture than usual. The dragon throne was very big, almost half the size of a bed. The empress's posture revealed her graceful figure even more. She usually wore a loose dragon robe which didn't reveal her figure. It was only at this moment that Li Mu realized that the empress actually had such an impressive figure. He walked around the palace, and the empress was still quietly reading her book as if she didn't discover anything. This meant that Li Mu could also hide his figure without leaving any traces in front of other 7th realm cultivators. He frantically tested the empress a few more times at the edge of danger, but the empress still didn't react. Li Mu's heart was completely at ease. Just as he was about to leave, the empress suddenly put down the book in her hand. She skillfully formed a hand seal. Li Mu recognized this hand seal. It was the Mystic Light Technique's hand seal. Why did she use the Mystic Light Technique for no reason? Was she trying to spy on someone? At this moment, Li Mu was also somewhat curious. He looked up at the image displayed by the Mystic Light Technique and couldn't help but be stunned. The image was actually Changle Palace. Li Mu was confused. What was the empress doing? Was she spying on herself? At the same time, Zhou Yi's face also showed confusion. As if realizing something, she looked in a certain direction corresponding to the Mystic Light Technique. At the end of her line of sight, the invisible Li Mu met the empress's gaze, and his heart skipped a beat. Zhou Yi stood up and asked in confusion, "What kind of technique is this? Even I can't see through it. How did you do it?" Li Mu's awkward voice came from the void. "Your Majesty, it's not very convenient for me right now. I'll come back and explain later," Zhou Yi said. "What's not convenient about it? You dare to play this kind of trick in front of me? Hurry up and show yourself." With that, she waved her sleeves and a storm of magic power swept out. Li Mu instantly felt a chill all over his body. This demonic technique was naturally practical, but it couldn't resist too much external interference. It was more suitable for sneaking around. Once someone sensed it, they had to immediately use other countermeasures. Under this storm of magic power, he couldn't maintain his invisible state anymore. Although Li Mu escaped into the Demon Emperor's cave at the first moment, Zhou Yi still caught a glimpse of him before he fled in a panic. The scene that she tried so hard to forget once again appeared in her mind. Changle Palace. Mr. Mei walked in slowly and handed a letter to Zhou Yi. He said, "Your Majesty, this is what Li Mu asked me to give to Your Majesty." Zhou Yi still hadn't recovered from the morning's events. Her gaze was a little absent-minded. She said, "Put it on the table." Mr. Mei shook his head and said strangely, "I don't know why he couldn't tell Your Majesty face to face. He hurriedly handed this letter to me and left the palace." Zhou Yi suddenly raised her head and said nervously, "What, he left the palace?" She sensed and found that Li Mu's aura was indeed gone from the palace. However, Wan Wan and Xiaobai were still there. This made her feel at ease. As long as they were still there, Li Mu wasn't running away. She opened the letter. There were only 2 short lines on it. "Your Majesty, I need to go to Yingzhou to deal with the 10 demonic corpses. Then I'll go back to Mount Baiyun to attend Senior Xianjizi's disciple recruitment ceremony. I'll return to the divine capital in a few days. Li Mu." For some reason, Zhou Qiong heaved a sigh of relief after reading the letter. She was still worried. When Li Mu came to Changle Palace later, should she pretend that nothing happened? Or should she pretend to be furious and reprimand him, and then let it go easily? If she pretended that nothing happened, what would he think? Would he think that she was an unreserved woman? If she pretended to be angry and reprimanded him fiercely, she would regret it even more if she hurt his feelings and made him want to leave. Compared to these 2 choices, it was obviously better to separate temporarily. After some time, both of them would forget about this matter and pretend that nothing had happened. At the same time that Zhou Yi breathed a sigh of relief in Changle Palace, Li Mu also breathed a long sigh of relief outside the divine capital. Although running away was shameful, it was useful. Otherwise he really didn't know how to face the Empress. He didn't even know how to explain it. Although the Empress was already 30 years old, she was still a pure and innocent girl who hadn't seen the world. Li Mu was really worried that he would leave a psychological scar on her. He was even more worried that she would mistakenly think that he had some strange fetish. Suddenly, he didn't have the courage to step into Changle Palace. Rather than stay here and make things awkward for both of them, it was better to separate temporarily and let time wash away everything. He originally planned to find the corpse sect later and deal with the 10 demonic corpses. Now he had to bring it forward. At the Department of Offerings. The slovenly Taoist priest looked at Li Mu and frowned. What are you up to this time? Last time he followed Li Mu to the demonic emperor's cave. If he didn't come out, his talisman of divine fate would undoubtedly be gone. The slovenly Taoist priest only wanted to spend the year well, get the talisman of divine fate, and then continue to look for opportunities to break through. Li Mu, go to Yingzhou. The slovenly Taoist priest shook his head. No. That kind of place where even birds don't shit. What's the point of going to that, Li Mu? When we come back from Yingzhou, I'll give you the talisman of divine fate. The slovenly Taoist priest stood up and asked, when do we leave? Li Mu, now. Several days later in the hinterland of Yingzhou. The sky here was gray, and the air was filled with poisonous miasma. Two figures stepped through the air and floated above a valley. The location of the corpse sect was very secretive. Even the demonic Tao only knew that they were in Yingzhou, but they didn't know the exact location of the corpse sect. However, to Li Mu, who had the memories of the 1,000 illusions, coming to the corpse sect was like going home. It wasn't just like home, it was home. The slovenly Taoist priest asked, you really don't want me to go with you? Li Mu shook his head and said, no need. He dragged the slovenly Taoist priest along just in case. With his current strength, if he encountered an enemy at the peak of the 6th realm, it would be difficult for him to escape. With the slovenly Taoist priest around, unless they encountered a 7th realm, there wouldn't be any accidents. After the death of the 1,000 illusions venerable master, there were no more 6th realm cultivators in the corpse sect. Although there were many 5th realm cultivators with the demonic emperor's cave and the Tao Bell, Li Mu could deal with them no matter how many 5th realm cultivators there were. His face changed and soon, it was the face of a stranger. This person had a white face and was a young man. Li Mu had changed his appearance based on old Wang's. He left the slovenly Taoist priest and continued to fly forward for 10 miles, arriving in front of a mountain. Li Mu flew forward another 100 feet and suddenly, a few voices came from the mountain. Scram. This is not a place you can come to. I'll give you 10 breaths. If you don't scram, I'll extract your soul and refine your corpse. Li Mu's body floated in the air and he said calmly, how dare you? His voice was steady and powerful and it echoed throughout the mountain. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One by one, figures flew out from the mountain. More than 10 figures floated in front of Li Mu, their faces filled with shock. These people were all 5th realm cultivators. Among the 10 demonic sects, the corpse sect's strength was only weaker than the sage sects. If the Grand Elder, the 1,000 illusions venerable master, reached the 7th realm, he could suppress the 1,000 illusions venerable master and make the corpse sect the number 1 sect below the sage sect. Unfortunately, with the death of the 1,000 illusions venerable master, the corpse sect was leaderless and became a demonic sect. A tall and thin man with a pale face like a corpse stared at Li Mu and asked, who are you? What business do you have in the corpse sect? Li Mu smiled and said, Qin Shi, we haven't seen each other for 3 years and you don't recognize me? Qin Shi's expression changed greatly. Although the person in front of him had a different appearance and voice, his expression, actions, and even subtle eyes were exactly the same as the god in his heart, the Grand Elder 1,000 illusions. You're the Grand Elder. Qin Shi blurted out and then said flatly, no, this is impossible. The Grand Elder's soul lamp has been extinguished. He can't be alive. The 1,000 illusions venerable master's soul lamp had been extinguished, which meant that his soul had died long ago. It was impossible for him to appear in front of everyone. The soul lamp and life talisman were connected to the soul. Li Mu couldn't deceive the Nether Saint and now he couldn't deceive these people. He didn't deny it and said indifferently, the 1,000 illusions venerable master is indeed dead. The one standing in front of you now is my memory host. I have erased the memory of his original body. Now I am him and he is me. Hearing this, everyone in the soul sect was shocked. Erasing someone else's memory and replacing it with his own. How crazy was he to do such a thing? In this way, who was the identity of the person whose memory was erased? If he was himself, he only had the memory of another person. But if he was 1,000 illusions, he had nothing but 1,000 illusions memory. How could the corpse sect treat him as the Grand Elder? Qin Shi looked at Li Mu and said in a low voice, what evidence do you have? Li Mu said indifferently, Qin Shi, how dare you talk to me like this? Have you forgotten who picked you up from the pile of corpses and taught you how to cultivate and refine corpses? After saying this, he looked at another person and said, Han Shirsen, what's with that look? Don't think that I don't know about you and the female corpse you refined. Sun Chi has already told everyone about it. Han Shirsan's face was red. Looking at the other person, he gritted his teeth and said, Sun Chi, didn't you say you would keep it a secret for me? Sun Chi looked embarrassed and said, I accidentally let it slip. Li Mu continued, Sun Chi, once when Han Shi-san wasn't around, you secretly did something indescribable with his female corpse. All these years I didn't tell anyone. Han Shi-san was furious. What? Sun Chi, you bastard. I thought you were my brother, but you did something worse than a beast. Sun Chi retorted, if I'm worse than a beast, then what are you? Seeing that the two were about to fight over a spirit corpse, Qin Shi said in a low voice, Shut up, we'll talk about this later. He looked at Li Mu. At this moment he didn't have any doubts about what Li Mu said. If he didn't have the head elder's memories, how could he find this place and know everything about the corpse sect? Even so, he still couldn't accept such a special existence. He looked at Li Mu and said, You said it yourself, you're not the head elder. You only have the head elder's memories. The head elder of the corpse sect is already dead. Go back to where you came from, Li Mu sighed and said regretfully, If that's the case, then the 10,000-year-old ancient corpses I found can only be refined slowly after I establish the new corpse sect. I wonder if the two level 8 ancient corpses can be refined into 2 spirit corpses. Hearing this, everyone in the corpse sect was shocked. What? Level 8 ancient corpse. This is a supreme grade material, I wonder if it's a male or a female. If I can refine a spirit corpse in this lifetime, I can die without regrets, Li Mu said indifferently and turned to leave. In the next moment, an urgent voice came from behind him. Hold on. Qin Shi looked at Li Mu with a burning gaze and asked, Can you let us see those ancient corpses? Li Mu waved his hand, and 10 demon corpses were placed neatly in front of everyone. Everyone looked at these demon corpses and after a short silence, they were completely shocked. Oh my god, the corpse still has such a strong aura after being dead for so long. He must have been a level 8 powerhouse when he was alive. These 2 corpses are both level 8, and the remaining ones are no lower than level 7. Where did you find these supreme grade ancient corpses? My hands are starting to itch. I want one of these 2 level 8 ancient corpses. Bullshit, that's mine. Then let's see if you have the ability. Wanna fight? Looking at the corpse sect disciples arguing endlessly, Li Mu waved his hand again, and the 10 demon corpses were recalled by him. He looked at the group of corpse sect disciples and said indifferently, Have you seen enough? The crowd's noise came to an abrupt end. Their gazes met and soon, everyone had a decision in their eyes. In the next moment, with Qin Shi in the lead, everyone cupped their fists and bowed at the same time, saying loudly, All corpse sect disciples welcome the return of the head elder. Chapter 419. Greetings, Grand Elder. Greetings, Grand Elder. Dozens of corpse sect disciples stood on the mountain peak and bowed to Li Mu. Li Mu's gaze was indifferent as he said indifferently, Your words have enlightened me. I'm not Qian Huan, I only obtained his memories. The corpse sect has nothing to do with me and you have nothing to do with me. From today onwards you are you and I am me. I have nothing to do with you. Plop. Hearing this, the dozens of corpse sect disciples directly knelt on the ground. Grand Elder, you can't abandon us. The corpse sect can't do without the Grand Elder. You've obtained the Grand Elder's inheritance, you're our Grand Elder. Please forgive our offense just now, Grand Elder. To the corpse sect disciples, it didn't matter whether the person in front of them was Qian Huan or not. It didn't matter whether he had obtained Qian Huan's memories. No matter who it was, to be able to give them 2 level 8 ancient corpses and 8 level 7 ancient corpses, he was the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Even if Grand Elder Qian Huan was still alive, he wouldn't be able to give them so much. As a corpse refiner, what could be more exciting than personally refining a spirit corpse? Not to mention, the person in front of them had Grand Elder Qian Huan's memories. He was more qualified than anyone to become the corpse sect's Grand Elder. Li Mu's expression eased as he said indifferently, Stand up and speak. The purpose of his words just now was to establish his authority, not to draw a clear line between him and the corpse sect. If he left the corpse sect, where would he find the materials needed to refine corpses and these professional workers who didn't ask for anything in return? After subduing these people, Li Mu could rest assured and leave them to others. Seeing Li Mu's expression ease, the corpse sect disciples knew that the Grand Elder had forgiven them. They all relaxed and started to get closer to Li Mu. Grand Elder's cultivation is profound. He'll rule the 10 continents for thousands of years. Under Grand Elder's leadership, The corpse sect will surpass the sacred sect sooner or later and become the leader of the 10 sects. Grand Elder, where did you find these ancient corpses? Li Mu raised his hand and the crowd stopped talking abruptly. He glanced at the crowd and said, "These 10 ancient corpses are the key to the rise of the corpse sect. No one is allowed to leak this information, not even the sage sect or the other sections. If anyone violates this rule, they will be severely punished." As his voice fell, an extremely powerful aura emanated from his body. This aura swept out, and the people of the corpse sect felt an extreme pressure from the bottom of their hearts. From the very beginning, everyone could feel that the person who called himself the Great Elder was not even at the 6th realm. This was also the reason why they were unwilling to acknowledge him. It was only because of the 10 precious ancient corpses that they temporarily compromised. At this moment, under this imposing aura, they felt as if they were seeing the Great Elder come back to life. There was no doubt that the new First Elder was also an absolute powerhouse. After recovering from his shock, Han 13 patted his chest and promised, "Rest assured, Great Elder. If anyone dares to leak this information, I, Han 13, will be the first to extract his soul and refine his corpse. We are members of the corpse sect in life, and we will die as corpses of the corpse sect. We will follow the orders of the Great Elder." Yes, Great Elder. Although Qian Huan was dead, his prestige in the hearts of the people of the corpse sect was extremely high. Li Mu only used a little trick and easily inherited his position in the corpse sect. The entire corpse sect of the demonic path was the inheritance that Qian Huan left to him. Li Mu took this as Qian Huan possessing Old Wang as compensation for hurting his feelings. Of course, he was also very clear that the reason why the attitude of the people of the corpse sect changed so much was because of the 10 corpses. To a certain extent, the disciples of the corpse sect were all artists. They treated refining corpses as art. It was their art that was not understood by the world. Li Mu released the 10 corpses once again. The people of the corpse sect looked at them, their faces flushed red and their breathing quickened. Li Mu looked at them and said, "I still have important matters to attend to and can't stay in the corpse sect. I will leave these corpses to you. I hope you won't disappoint me." Han 13 licked his lips and said, "Rest assured, Great Elder. With these corpses, the rise of our corpse sect is just around the corner." For the next 3 days, Li Mu stayed in the corpse sect. Refining ordinary corpses was very different from refining corpses of this level. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he personally guided the people of the corpse sect and set up the corpse refining formation. He also confirmed a few important steps with them before he left with peace of mind. These 10 corpses required a lot of materials to refine. It would completely exhaust the wealth of the corpse sect, but no one cared. If they ran out of materials, they could save them up again. Corpses of this level were rare. Long before he came to the Ying continent, Li Mu had used a secret technique to refine these corpses once. This refinement could ensure that no matter how strong they were after they were refined, they would not have their own independent consciousness and could be controlled by Li Mu. In this way, even if the disciples of the corpse sect had other ideas in the future, they would not be able to cause too much trouble. When they left the Ying continent, the sloppy Taoist priest looked at Li Mu with a strange expression and said, "Kid, you have guts. It has always been the demonic Tao who has ideas about others. You are the first one who dares to do this to them." Li Mu did not say anything. He waved his hand and a golden light flew out and was caught by the sloppy Taoist priest. The sloppy old Taoist priest glanced at him. "It's still early for a year." Li Mu said, "From now on, Senior is free." When he had tried to rope in the sloppy Taoist priest, it was only to intimidate the Department of Worship. Now the Department of Worship no longer needed his intimidation. Li Mu also did not need to force him to stay. The lifelong pursuit of an expert of this level was to find that glimmer of hope to transcend. If he stayed in the Department of Worship and became a pawn of the imperial court, it would be very difficult for him to find his own Tao. Back then, he had enlightened Li Mu and it was not something that could be repaid with a mere 800 coins. Take this heavenly secret talisman as a token of gratitude for his guidance. The sloppy Taoist priest held the heavenly secret talisman with a look of admiration and said, "If Talisman Daozi did not beat me to it, I would really want to take you as my disciple." Li Mu smiled and cupped his hands. "I wish Senior to step into the Transcendence Great Tao as soon as possible." The sloppy Taoist priest waved his hand and said, "I also wish you to enter the bridal chamber as soon as possible and become the mother of the world." He took a last look at Li Mu before his body turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the horizon. Li Mu floated in the void alone and sighed in his heart. He had already taken all the shortcuts in his cultivation. How could it be so easy to step into the Dongxian? As for dominating the world, it was even more impossible. The 10 continents and 3 islands were vast and boundless. Although everyone knew that the 7th realm was the peak, no one knew if there were 8th and 9th realms in some secret places. Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and stopped thinking about these things. He had to take one step at a time. Thinking about these things too early was not good for his cultivation. He identified the direction and flew towards the northwest. A few days later, on Mount Baiyun. In the Taoist palace on the main peak, Xian Jizi said in surprise, "Junior brother, didn't you say that you would come in a few days? Why are you here so early?" Li Mu said, "I have nothing to do in the imperial court, so I came a few days earlier." The real reason was that he was hiding from the empress. This time he had lost a lot of face in front of the empress. He did not even bring Wanwan and Xiaobai and fled. He had to at least wait until the end of the apprenticeship ceremony and wait until the empress had completely forgotten about that matter before he appeared in front of her. Xian Jizi smiled and said, "You came back just in time. Qing, just came out of seclusion yesterday." Li Qing's cultivation was originally at the 4th realm. In the past 2 months, under the cultivation of the Fulu school, her cultivation was already at the peak of the 4th realm. She was only 1 step away from the 5th realm. This small step did not rely on seclusion but on chance. Lu Hanyin and Yu Zhenzi were traveling outside. Li Mu held Li Qing's hand and strolled around Mount Baiyun. The two of them met up with Hanja and talked about the days when they were constables in Yangqiu County. Seeing Li Qing reminiscing, Li Mu suggested that the two of them go back to the county yamen to have a look. At Qingshen Peak, Hanja looked at the two of them leaving inside. He said, "Junior sister Li still benefited that guy in the end. So what if he's good-looking? Just because he's good-looking he can marry too." Junior sister Qin stood beside him and snorted softly. She said, "Are you still not giving up on senior sister Li?" Hanja shook his head and said, "How can that be? As early as 2 years ago when she rejected me I gave up on her. Besides, she and Li Mu are both my friends. How can I still have such feelings for her?" Junior sister Qin raised her eyebrows. "Really? Really?" Hanja let out a long sigh and said, "Junior sister Li is like a flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Instead of pursuing these illusory things, it's better to cherish the person in front of you. Li Si told me this a long time ago. I actually only understood it now." Junior sister Qin pursed her lips and combed the hair in front of her forehead. She asked, You're finally enlightened?" Hanja rolled his eyes at her and said, "I'm not stupid." Junior sister Qin asked, "How do you plan to cherish the person in front of you?" Hanja suddenly looked at her with burning eyes. Junior sister Qin's face turned red. She clasped her hands together and looked down at her toes. Hanja said, "Junior sister Qin, I have something to say to you for a long time. I don't know if you're willing to." Junior sister Qin said without hesitation, "I'm willing." Hanja said happily, "Then help me ask senior sister Zheng if she's willing to be my Dao companion." Junior sister Qin lowered her head. After a long silence, she raised her head and said with a smile, "Okay." She flew back to the mountain gate and came to the female disciple's residence. She knocked on a door. A female disciple opened the door and asked doubtfully, "Junior sister Qin, what's the matter?" Junior sister Qin looked at her and said, "Senior sister Zheng, senior brother Han asked me to pass on a message to you." The female disciple asked, "What message?" Junior martial sister Qin said, "He said that you have an oval face, no breasts, no buttocks, and you have a terrible temper. Whoever becomes your Dao companion will have 8 lifetimes of bad luck." 15 minutes later, Hanja, whose face was bruised and his clothes were full of holes, sat on the ground in a sorry state. He looked up at the sky and asked loudly, "Why? Why did you do this to me? Is it wrong to like someone?" Junior sister Qin used the spiritual liquid to help him heal the bruises on his face. She shook her head and said, "This is a good thing. It let you see senior sister Zheng's temper in advance. If you two become Dao companions in the future and she treats you like this every day, it will be too late for you to regret it." Hanja thought carefully and nodded. "You seem to be right." Junior sister Qin smiled and said, "Of course. You're my only family in this world. How can I lie to you? Next time if you like any senior sister, tell me. I'll help you confess." Hanja waved his hand and said, "Forget it. I've thought it through. Women will only affect my cultivation speed. I'll cultivate wholeheartedly in the future." Junior sister Qin looked at him with a smile and said, "Then I'll accompany you." Yangqiu County. The county government. There were not many familiar faces in the place where Li Mu and Li Qing used to work together. In the former duty room, Constable Zhou looked at their tightly held hands and said with a smile, "I knew it. I knew it." The cultivators in the government office had changed again and again. Most of the constables had changed. Only Constable Zhou remained the same. The county government office was still the same, but Li Mu and Li Qing were not the same as before. After chatting with Constable Zhou for a while, the two walked out of the county government office and walked on the street hand in hand. In 2 years, the noodle stall that Li Qing liked to eat the most no longer had the same taste as before. Some of the familiar shops along the street were more ostentatious. Some had changed their business because of poor management. Roast chicken, crispy outside and tender inside. Roast chicken only costs 10 copper coins. 20 copper coins for 3, 100 copper coins for 12. Walking on the street, Li Mu suddenly smelled a tempting fragrance. He and Li Qing looked at the corner of the street at the same time. Li Qing said in surprise, "It's them?" At the corner of the street, a middle-aged couple stood in front of a temporary stall and shouted loudly. The middle-aged couple was short and ugly. However, the roasted chicken they were selling had a tempting aroma that whetted one's appetite with just a sniff. Because of that, their business was very good. The customers in front of the stall had already formed a long line. In Li Mu's eyes, they were not a middle-aged couple but two weasels. After 2 years, Li Mu and Li Qing met the weasel couple again. There were many customers. Although the two monsters were in a hurry, their faces were full of joy. "We don't have any more today. Please come again tomorrow." "I'm really sorry. We'll definitely prepare a few more tomorrow." Sorry. Come here tomorrow to buy roast chicken. We'll give you a bowl of chicken soup for free." The weasel couple sold the last roast chicken and put away the stall. They had a happy expression on their faces. If they maintained this business, they would be able to buy a small house here in half a year at most. Suddenly, the weasel seemed to have sensed something and looked forward. A young man and woman were holding hands. They waved at them and then turned to leave. The weasel was stunned for a moment. Then joy appeared on his face. He subconsciously wanted to chase after them but was stopped by the woman beside him. The woman shook her head and said, "Don't disturb them." The weasel looked forward again. If what he was looking at was a painting, then the two figures were the most beautiful colors in the painting. They were so beautiful that one could not bear to destroy them. The weasel took a step forward and retracted his steps. If it were not for them, the couple would have been destroyed in body and soul. The weasel couple knelt down and kowtowed a few times in the direction where the two figures disappeared, ignoring the surprised eyes of the passers-by on the street. Seeing the weasel couple's current appearance, Li Mu was very gratified. They had helped each other in difficult times and grew old together. These two demons had lived the life that Li Mu wanted. What he longed for was not status or power. It was enough for him to be able to do what he loved with the person he loved. He held Li Qing's hand tightly and took her into the flask space. The two stood by the lake. Li Mu looked at Li Qing, who was shocked by the scenery in front of her, and said softly, "This is where we will live in the future." Li Qing came back to her senses after a long time. Li Mu took her to the row of lakeside houses and said, "You can live in whichever one you like in the future." Li Qing thought for a moment and pointed to an exquisite small building with a flower garden in front of the courtyard. She said, "I like this one. P.S. You can follow my WX public account, not Rong Xiaorong. I made a map of the world of Greizhou myself. It is not easy to find the Easter egg after it is posted. I will post it on the public account at the same time. The public account will also update the character designs and so on. It will be easier to find it in the future." Chapter 420. Li Mu looked at the exquisite building with a flower bed and was speechless for a moment. This building was built by the Empress for herself. Every beam, every piece of wood, and every blade of grass in the flower bed were all made by the Empress. If she came here in the future and saw that someone had taken over her home, Li Mu couldn't imagine how furious she would be. One was his superior who loved and protected him, the other was his beloved woman. Li Mu's heart was in a dilemma as to which side to lean towards. Angering the Empress wouldn't end well. No one knew this better than Li Mu. But Li Mu didn't want his beloved woman to be sad. Li Qing saw his strange expression and asked, "What's wrong? Is this building not okay?" Li Mu's throat moved. He shook his head and said, "It's not that it's not okay. It's just that I suddenly want to build a house with you. A house that we built with our own hands, a house that belongs to us. Every structure of the house will be designed by us. We can also open a small garden in front of the house and plant the flowers we like in the garden. Li Qing imagined the scene that Li Mu described. Her beautiful face showed that she was moved. Compared to this small building in front of her, being able to build a house of love with the person she loved was obviously more meaningful. She nodded her head and said, "Okay." Li Mu wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and said, "Let's go. Let's go prepare the materials to build the house." 3 days later, Mount Baiyun. There was still some time before the disciple recruitment ceremony. Li Qing once again entered seclusion. Xian Jizi had exchanged a top-grade medicinal pill from the Pill Cauldron sect, which could help her completely cross the last barrier between the divine ability and the creation realm. Li Mu also took advantage of his free time to cultivate in seclusion on Mount Baiyun. It was very difficult for his cultivation of Tao to improve in a short period of time. His cultivation of Buddhism had also reached a bottleneck. Li Mu put most of his energy into learning demonic arts. Every path of cultivation had its own strengths and weaknesses. The more one dabbled in, the more one would have their own strengths and fewer weaknesses. The various demonic techniques recorded in the demon race's heavenly book were extremely useful to Li Mu, and he began to think about the other heavenly books. Each of the 6 Taoist sects had a Tao page. It was very likely that the Buddhists had one as well. The demon race's heavenly book was in Li Mu's hands. The fox race's heavenly book was in the hands of the 10,000 Illusions Lord. The ghost Tao's heavenly book was nowhere to be found. The other heavenly books were also rarely found. Among the heavenly books, Li Mu came into contact with the other 5 sects of the Tao sect the easiest. However, even though the 6 sects were all part of the Tao sects, it was impossible for them to lend their sect's treasures to others to comprehend. Unless Li Mu hid his identity and became a core disciple of one of the sects, or participated in the various sects' disciple recruitment trials and obtained first place, none of these methods were realistic for Li Mu. Li Mu stopped thinking about these and continued to comprehend the demonic techniques. At a certain moment, a Fulu flew in from outside and landed in the courtyard. The Fulu flashed and Li Mu heard Xian Jizi's voice. "Junior brother, please make a trip to the main peak's Tao Palace." Xian Jizi must have called him for something. Li Mu left the small hut and quickly flew to the main peak. In the main peak's Tao Palace, other than Xian Jizi, there was also a woman. She looked to be in her 30s and her skin was delicate and tight. She was like a charming young married woman, but her cultivation was already at the 6th realm. Li Mu naturally wouldn't think that she was only in her 30s or 40s. This woman had the fragrance of elixirs. The people of the Danding sect had always paid attention to maintaining their appearance, and they didn't lack elixirs to retain their looks. This woman was also a first seat of the Danding sect, and her age wouldn't be much younger than Yuzhen. Li Mu walked into the Tao Palace and asked, "Senior brother, what's the matter?" Xian Jizi looked at the woman and introduced her to Li Mu. "This is fellow Taoist Heng Yangzi of the Danding sect." Li Mu cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Heng Yangzi." Heng Yangzi returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist Ling Jizi." Xian Jizi said slowly, "To be honest, the only person in our sect who can refine the Tianji talisman is junior brother Ling Jizi. This matter requires his approval." Although a trace of shock flashed through the depths of Heng Yangzi's eyes, he didn't doubt Xian Jizi's words. He cupped his hands again and said to Li Mu, "Please, fellow Taoist Ling Jizi." Li Mu was still confused and looked at Xian Jizi. Xian Jizi explained, "It's like this, a senior of the Danding sect." After listening to him, Li Mu understood why the Danding sect sent 2 first seats to Mount Baiyun. Other than congratulating Xian Jizi on finding a beloved disciple, they also had a request. A grand elder of the Danding sect was nearing the end of his life and hoped to ask for a Tianji talisman from the Fulu school to extend his lifespan by 10 more years. For Li Mu this wasn't a big deal. At most it would take more effort. However, even blood brothers had to settle accounts. In the cultivation world no one would ask for help like this. Li Mu looked at Xian Jizi and asked, "The materials for the Tianji talisman." Heng Yangzi took the initiative and said, "The Danding sect will bear all the materials for the talisman." This was what they should bear. When Li Mu didn't know how to hint to her, Heng Yangzi continued, "If the talisman is successful, we will also prepare a generous gift for the Fulu school." The one who had to bear the burden was Li Mu. He couldn't let Xian Jizi take advantage of him. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Actually, I'm also interested in alchemy." Heng Yangzi immediately said, "I can give you a book on alchemy. The book contains the insights of the seniors of my sect on alchemy." Li Mu said, "I heard that the Danding sect's Tao page contains the truth of alchemy." Heng Yangzi understood what he meant. After a moment of silence he said, I can't make the decision on my own. I need to ask the sect master. Heng Yangzi walked out of the Dao Palace and quickly returned. He said, Senior sister has agreed. If the Qinji talisman is successful, we can let fellow Taoist Ling Jizi study our Dao page once. This result was within Li Mu's expectations. Although the Dao page was a precious treasure of each sect, it wasn't that they never showed it to others. The Fulu school would let the first place in the talisman Dao trial to study the Dao page once. After they studied it they could choose to join the sect or not. Li Mu chose to join while Zhou Zhong chose to leave. The other 5 sects also had the same rule. The 6 sects had been passed down for thousands of years. Countless seniors of the sects had studied the Dao page and passed it down while innovating. What made the 6 sects what they were today was not the Dao page, but the hard work of generations of seniors of the sections. Therefore, borrowing the Danding sect's Dao page to study was not a matter of principle for the Danding sect. After receiving the Danding sect's promise, Li Mu cracked his knuckles and stretched his muscles. He said to Xian Jizi, Senior brother, we can begin? Several days later. Dark clouds gathered in the sky above White Cloud Mountain again, accompanied by a strong heavenly might. After experiencing it once, the elders and disciples of White Cloud Mountain were used to it. They already knew that the appearance of this kind of heavenly phenomenon on White Cloud Mountain meant the birth of a saint-level Fulu. Wasn't it normal for a saint-level Fulu to be born in the ancestral court of Fulu school? Soon the first seats flew towards the thunderclouds. Not long after, the thunderclouds dissipated and the sky returned to normal. In the Taoist palace on the main peak, Hyun Jinko handed the divine secret talisman to Heng Yangzi. Heng Yangzi carefully accepted it and cupped his hands. Thank you, Taoist Shen Jizi, Taoist Ling Jizi. Then she stretched out her hand and a blank page appeared in her palm. Li Mu's cultivation was no longer the same as before. In addition, before he wrote the talisman, the Pill Cauldron sect had given him a lot of elixirs to recover his magic power and mind. At this moment he was in a good state. Li Mu took the page and sat down cross-legged. When his mind touched the page, it immediately sank into another space. What entered his eyes was a familiar fog. Li Mu did not delay. He closed his eyes and began to recite the clear heart mantra over and over again. He did not know how many times he recited it. When he opened his eyes, the fog in front of him had disappeared. In a desolate and broken world, there was scorched earth everywhere. Countless giant beasts were wreaking havoc on the ground. In the distance, countless figures stood in the air. Countless streams of light flew out from their hands. The streams of light streaked past Li Mu's eyes. He could vaguely see that there were round pills in the light. A pill flew into the middle of a few giant beasts and exploded. A black hole appeared at the spot where the pill exploded. The giant beasts were instantly sucked into the black hole and disappeared. A pill flew into the mouth of a giant beast. The giant beast roared and fell to the ground powerlessly. Soon it turned into stone. Some pills exploded, turning into flames that could not be extinguished. Some pills touched the giant beast and turned into blue ice. Li Mu had seen a similar scene in the Fulu school's Dao page. The difference was that those people could draw talismans in the air, but these humans used pills as weapons to attack these giant beasts. They would also throw some pills into their mouths. They seemed to be used to recover their spiritual power. A pill flew in from afar and passed through Li Mu's body. A piece of information suddenly appeared in Li Mu's mind. After realizing what this was, Li Mu reached out and grabbed another pill that flew in front of him. The pill passed through his palm and Li Mu grabbed nothing but air. However, a new piece of information appeared in his mind. The Pill Cauldron sect's Dao page was someone else's after all. There was only one chance to comprehend it. Li Mu flew into the crowd and touched the pills up close. Pieces of information about the Dao of alchemy flowed into Li Mu's mind. In the Dao palace, Heng Yangzi instinctively sensed that something was wrong. He looked puzzled. Xian Jizi smiled and asked, "What's wrong, Taoist Heng Yangzi?" Heng Yangzi said, "Comprehending the Dao page requires a lot of mental energy. Taoist Ling Jizi's cultivation is not high, but he can persist for so long." Xian Jizi looked at him and said meaningfully, "Although my junior brother's cultivation is limited, his mental state is abnormally firm. Even I admire him." At a certain moment, Li Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly opened his eyes. He stood up and returned the Dao page to Heng Yangzi. He said, "Thank you." Heng Yangzi put away the Dao page and asked, "How much did Taoist Ling Jizi comprehend?" Li Mu said humbly, "A little, a little." Chapter 421. With the experience of comprehending the Fulu Dao page last time, Li Mu had learned to keep a low profile. He had said that he was just going to take a look, but in the end, Li Mu had inherited everything that the Danding sect had inherited from the Dao page. What the Danding sect had not comprehended from the Dao page, Li Mu had also secretly learned. It was no exaggeration to say that the current him could already use his knowledge of alchemy to establish a second Danding sect. It was just that there was no need to do so. Hearing Li Mu say that he had only comprehended a little, Heng Yangzi was finally relieved. After all, the Dao page was an item of the sect's inheritance. If it were not for the fact that they had a favor to ask of the Fulu school this time, they definitely would not have taken the Dao page out to trade. Heng Yangzi put away the Tianji talisman and the Dao page and quickly left. Xian Jizi looked at Li Mu and asked, "Junior brother, how much have you comprehended from the Danding sect's inheritance?" Li Mu shrugged and said, "I can swear to the heavenly Dao that it really is only a little." Xian Jizi thought to himself that perhaps he was overthinking. It was already rare for him to have such talent in the Dao of Talismans and the Dao of Dao. Wanting him to also have such high attainments in alchemy was a bit too much. At this time, Li Mu looked at Xian Jizi with shining eyes and asked, "Senior brother, can you borrow the Dao pages of the other 4 sects to take a look?" Xian Jizi shook his head and said, "I'm afraid not. If it's just the Danding sect, we can still use your interest in alchemy as an excuse. If we use the same excuse for all the other sects, it would seem that we have ulterior motives." Xian Jizi's words made sense. The Fulu school had its own Dao page. If they wanted to take it for free, they obviously had bad intentions. The various Daoist sects might think that the Fulu school had the ambition of swallowing up the 5 sections. Although all the sects had this idea, thinking and doing were 2 different things. In the next few days, Li Mu began to digest the knowledge of alchemy he had obtained from the Dao page. Cultivators generally believed that the function of pills was to gather the essence of spiritual objects in the world. After consuming it, it could increase one's magic power and heal injuries. However, this understanding was obviously narrow. From what Li Mu had seen, the cultivators of ancient times mostly used pills as weapons. Just like the Fulu school's Fulu, they could greatly increase one's battle prowess. Unfortunately, the Dan Cauldron sect did not pass down those powerful pill treasures. The Pill Cauldron school was very sincere. After letting Li Mu comprehend the Dao page, they also gave him an alchemy book and an alchemy furnace. The book of alchemy was not precious. It was an entry-level book in the world of cultivation. The 6 Daoist sects were very generous. They did not forbid the circulation of some basic Fu, pills and formations. Instead, they supported it. This was also the reason why the Daoist sects had grown so rapidly in the past few hundred years. Unlike the other sects, Taoism was more willing to share. Of course, the core secrets of the Daoist sects were only known to the upper echelons and core disciples. The alchemy book that the Pill Cauldron school gave Li Mu was only an entry-level book. What was truly precious was the annotations in the alchemy book. This would allow Li Mu to avoid many detours. After asking Xian Jizi for some spiritual herbs, Li Mu began to try refining pills. At first he failed a few furnaces. However, when he discovered that the art of tranquility could also be used to refine pills, his success rate greatly increased. Although writing talismans and refining pills were 2 different things, there were similarities. One required one to control the talisman's magic power, while the other required one to control the temperature of the flames. If one's mind wavered, the Fu would be destroyed. Similarly, if one's magic power wavered, the flames would become unstable, and the pills in the cauldron would be destroyed. During this period, Li Mu used the materials given to him by Xian Jizi to practice on Mount Baiyun. After a few days, when he returned to the divine capital and joined forces with the Empress, he might have a chance to refine a saint-level pill. Half a month later, the Fulu school's headmaster Xian Jizi and Elder Yuzenzi's apprenticeship ceremony was held as scheduled. This was a rare occasion for the Fulu school in recent years. The other 5 sects of Taoism, the major subsects of the Fulu school, and some reputable sects in the cultivation world all sent people to Mount Baiyun to congratulate them. The names of Li Qing and Lu Hanyan were also known by the major sects in the cultivation world. As the direct disciples of the Fulu school's headmaster and great elder, their futures were limitless. It could even be said that the future of the Fulu school rested on their shoulders. In these few days, the 2 girls received so many gifts that their hands went soft. Li Mu purposely built a few more rooms in the cave to store the gifts they received. Inside the cave, Lu Hanyan stood by the lake and sighed. "What a beautiful place," Li Mu said. "This will be our home from now on." Lu Hanyan looked at Li Mu and asked, I heard little sister Qing say that the two of you personally built a small building here? Li Mu immediately said, at that time you were outside. I originally planned to build one here when you came back. Lu Hanyin waved her hand and said, I'm too lazy to build one. The small buildings here are all good. I'll just pick one. As soon as she finished speaking, Li Mu's heart skipped a beat. He pretended not to care at all and said, then you can choose whatever you want. Lu Hanyin walked around the lake and sized up the small buildings. Li Mu walked to her side and suggested, what do you think of this one? It's facing south and has the best feng shui. Lu Hanyin shook her head and said, I don't like this one. Li Mu continued, what about this one? The terrace outside is so good. You can usually play the zither on it. Lu Hanyin continued to shake her head and said, it's mediocre and has no characteristics. When passing by another small building, Li Mu quickened his pace and glanced around. He thought to himself, please don't choose this one, please don't choose this one. Lu Hanyin stopped and pointed to an exquisite small building with a flower garden. She said, this one. Li Mu stopped and said with a smile, actually, I think it's more meaningful for the two of us to build a love house with our own hands. Lu Hanyin said, but I really like this small building. Look at how beautiful it is. It's like a palace and there's a small flower garden in front of it. Li Mu's throat moved. He said, we can copy this small building and build an identical. Lu Hanyin asked, since we already have one, why do we have to build another one? Li Mu said, this is different. Don't you want to have a small building built by the two of us? Lu Hanyin said indifferently, no need to be so troublesome. There's no difference anyway. Li Mu looked at her and said helplessly, why are you so unromantic? Lu Hanyin frowned and said, are you saying that I'm not as romantic as Sister Qing? As expected, when there's a new person you forget the old. Do you think that I can't compare to her in any way? Li Mu hurriedly explained, it's not like that. Actually it's, Lu Hanyin asked angrily, what is it? Actually, this small building belongs to Her Majesty the Empress. Her Majesty the Empress. Why is Her Majesty the Empress small building in our house? Yes. Why are you hesitating? Is it because? No wonder you ran to the palace when we were not at home and didn't even go home. No wonder Her Majesty is so good to you. No wonder the rumors say that you are Empress Li. It turns out that what they said is true. After deducing for a while, Li Mu shook his head and threw these thoughts out of his mind. He could never say that to Lu Hanyin, otherwise things would become more difficult to end. Lu Hanyin was still waiting for Li Mu's answer. She asked, why are you shaking your head? Why don't you let me choose this one? Li Mu raised his head and explained, because Qing and I built this small building by ourselves. I'm worried that if you don't have it, you will think that I'm biased. I see. Lu Hanyin held Li Mu's hand and said, don't worry. I won't think too much. I don't want to be so troublesome. She held Li Mu's hand and walked into the small building. After looking around the small building, she was more satisfied. It's so beautiful inside. This bed is so big. It's so comfortable to lie down. The tables and chairs here are also made of spiritual wood. The carvings on them are so exquisite. They must be the work of a famous artist. The paintings on the wall, are they the original works of Daoxian Jinren from the previous dynasty? Most of his paintings have been lost. Where did you find them? These two vases are also so beautiful. They must be expensive? Li Mu stood in the room and squeezed out a smile. He said, as long as you like it. Xian Jizi and Yu Jinzi's disciple recruitment ceremony ended. Li Mu stayed for a few more days before returning to Shindu. Lu Hanyin and Li Qing did not return. In the following days they would receive the true inheritance of Fulu School. This was the most important opportunity for them to enter the 6th realm and even the 7th realm. After returning to Shindu, Li Mu stayed at home for 2 days to make sufficient preparations before going to the palace. At the entrance of Changguan Palace, he nervously asked Shangguan Li, is Her Majesty here? Shangguan Li nodded and said, Her Majesty is reading a book. You can go in by yourself. Li Mu walked into Changguan Palace and saw the Empress reclining on the dragon throne. He said softly, Your Majesty. The Empress's face was hidden behind the book. She said lightly, wait for me to finish reading this page. She read this page for a full quarter of an hour. Li Mu saw that she was holding the book upside down but did not dare to remind her. After a long time she put down the book and stood up. She asked, what's the result of the trip to Yingzhou? Li Mu said, I have successfully gained the trust of Corpse Sect and had them refine the 10 demonic corpses for me. The Empress asked, Aren't you afraid that they will use them against you after they refine them? Li Mu explained, Don't worry, Your Majesty. I have already used the spirit-splitting technique to deal with the 10 demonic corpses. No matter who refine them, they will only listen to my command. After that, the Empress asked him some questions about the apprenticeship ceremony. However, she didn't mention a single word about Li Mu's streaking in the Changel Palace. If she did not mention it, Li Mu would not take the initiative to mention it either. The two of them reached a tacit understanding about this matter. After the tacit understanding, the Empress said lightly, Take me to your cave. I want to see my flower garden. Chapter 422. If Li Mu was really guilty, he was willing to accept the punishment of the Great Zhou Law, rather than face this kind of scene every day. The Empress's small building was occupied by Lu Hanyan. She slept on the Empress's bed and even picked the Empress's flowers. How was Li Mu going to explain this to the Empress? In Changel Palace, Zhou Yi saw that Li Mu was still standing in the same place and said, Still not opening the door? Li Mu let out a sigh. With a thought, he appeared in the cave. The Empress's figure also appeared by his side. Zhou Yi was just about to go to his own small building when he found that it was different from the last time he was here. There were two more small buildings by the lake. One was unique and elegant, the other was grand and imposing. The grand and imposing building looked like a smaller version of Changel Palace at first glance. It immediately attracted Zhou Yi's attention. Although it was called a small building, it was actually more like a palace. Carved railings, painted rafters, and jade tiles flew. It was particularly conspicuous among the row of small buildings. There was a unique and luxurious air. There were flower beds on both sides of the front of the palace, and a winding path led to a secluded place. In the left flower bed there was a small pavilion. In the pavilion there were stone chairs and stone tables. In the right flower bed there was an ancient tree with a green shade. There was a swing hanging down. The swing was not a simple piece of wood, but an exquisite chair. The chair was carved with hollow patterns. At a glance, one could tell that a lot of effort had been put into it. At first glance, Zhou Yi fell in love with this building. Li Mu secretly glanced at the Empress's expression. He was slightly relieved. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, Your Majesty, I built this for you. Zhou Yi was surprised. For me? Li Mu nodded. Your Majesty's status is so noble. Only this small building can show Your Majesty's status. Your Majesty, please go inside and take a look. Zhou Yi's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. He nodded and said, Then let's take a look. The two of them walked along the small path in the middle of the flower bed, and entered this 3-story building. Li Mu introduced everything to the Empress one by one. This room is His Majesty's bedchamber. The bedchamber doesn't need to be too big, otherwise His Majesty won't be able to sleep well. This is a leisure area. In the future, Your Majesty can play chess or cards with Wanwan and Xiao Bai here. This is the kitchen. The area next to it is the dining area. After introducing the first floor, the two of them went to the second floor. The second floor was very spacious, with only a large hall. Li Mu continued, Your Majesty can use this as a place for seclusion. There are soundproof talismans on all 4 walls as well as the upper and lower walls. If you cultivate here, you definitely won't be disturbed. Then the two of them went up to the 3rd floor. On the 3rd floor, Li Mu had built a swimming pool. At the front of the pool was a balcony that led outside the room. Li Mu said, This is a place to take a bath. Before Your Majesty goes to bed at night, you can take a bath here. It will help you sleep. The balcony outside overlooks the lake. You can also lie there and watch the clouds. For this small building, Li Mu had put in a lot of effort. Standing on the balcony of the 3rd floor, he looked at the Empress and asked, Is Your Majesty satisfied with this place? Zhou Yi nodded and said, Not bad. You are very considerate. Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and said, As long as Your Majesty likes it. Zhou Yi continued, Okay, now let's go to my small building and have a look. Li Mu's expression froze and he asked, That small building, does Your Majesty still want it? Zhou Yi said, That was built by me. Of course I want it. Li Mu wiped his forehead and said, I thought that with this place Your Majesty would not want that building, so I took the initiative to sleep there for one night. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Zhou Yi rolled her eyes at him and asked, You have your own place. Why did you sleep in my place? Li Mu explained, Your Majesty, it is because I like Your Majesty's small building very much. Zhou Yi waved her hand and said, Forget it. Since you like it, I will give it to you. I will go and see my flowers. Li Mu breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, Your Majesty, please. A moment later, in the flower bed in front of the small building, Zhou Yi frowned, pointed to a corner of the flower bed and asked, There is a peony missing here. Who picked it? She also noticed that a peony was missing. Li Mu said nervously, I was careless. Zhou Yi looked at Li Mu, her brows gradually relaxed, but in the end she did not say anything. She walked out of the flower bed and said, This small building and flower bed, I will give them to you. Take good care of the flower bed. There is a painting in the building that I want to take away. As for the rest, I will give them to you. She walked into the room and stretched out her hand. The painting on the wall floated down and automatically rolled up into her hand. Although Lu Hanyan also liked this painting, but in the future when she asked, Li Mu could say that the Empress lent it to him. In order to make it more believable, he turned to ask the Empress, Your Majesty, what is the mystery of this painting? Zhou Yi said, This is the authentic work of the previous dynasty's master painter, Dao Xianzhenren. He entered the Dao through painting. In this painting there is his painting inheritance. Unfortunately, after the painting was cut off, no one could comprehend it. Li Mu remembered this reason. In the future when Lu Hanyan asked, he would say that the Empress lent it to him to comprehend the painting. Like Taoism and Buddhism, the school of painting was once a cultivation school. However, their lineage had been severed and they had completely disappeared. Until now, the successors of legalism, the school of the military, and Confucianism would occasionally appear, but there was no trace of the successor of the school of painting. Li Mu did not care about this. He had to take a closer look at this painting so that when he explained it to Lu Hanyan in the future, it would be more believable. Before the Empress put it away, Li Mu said, Your Majesty, can you let me take a look at this painting? Zhou Yi asked, This painting has been hanging here for so long, have you not seen it? Li Mu said, I only gave it a few glances. Zhou Yi did not say anything else. He stretched out his hand, and the painting automatically flew up and unfolded once again. Li Mu looked at the painting scroll. This was the first time he looked at this painting carefully. This was actually an ink landscape painting. There were not many elements in the painting. Distant mountains, near water, a lone boat, and standing at the bow of the boat was an old man wearing a straw raincoat. Li Mu did not know much about painting. He could only tell that although this painting was simple, it gave people an extremely spacious and distant feeling. However, if he were to say that he comprehended anything from the painting, that was really not the slightest bit. No matter how he looked at it, it was just an ordinary and mediocre landscape painting. Generally speaking, when his heart was the most peaceful, his comprehension was the strongest. Li Mu habitually chanted the clear heart incantation. When he looked at the painting again, he could not help but be shocked. Usually when he was upset, he would chant the clear heart incantation to calm his heart and qi. However, this time, after he chanted the clear heart incantation, the painting in his eyes became distorted. With just a casual glance, Li Mu felt dazzled. Accompanying this was a wave of dizziness. The more he chanted the clear heart incantation, the more distorted the painting became. In the end, he could only see balls of swirling ink. Li Mu felt that his soul was also swirling. In the next instant he appeared in a boundless world. Green mountains, clear water, and a lone boat. He stood at the stern of the boat. An old man wearing a straw raincoat stood at the bow of the boat with his back facing him. The old man held a paintbrush in his hand. When Li Mu looked over, the paintbrush moved. The old man held the paintbrush and his wrist moved quickly. It seemed that he was painting in the void. A ball of ink appeared in the air. It seemed to be a swimming fish. The old man's last stroke touched the fish's eye. The fish shook its tail and jumped into the water. The old man's paintbrush continued to move. After a while, a crane twisted its neck and let out a crisp cry. It flapped its wings and flew into the sky. The old man drew a mountain peak with a few strokes. The mountain peak flew into the distance and became a huge mountain peak. The huge mountain peak fell into the water and set off huge waves. It was as if it was going to capsize the small boat. The old man at the bow of the boat continued to draw. He drew a pair of wings. These wings appeared behind him. With two flaps, the old man's body left the boat and flew into the sky. A huge wave came and capsized the small boat. Li Mu fell into the water. In the next moment, he appeared in the Empress's small house again. The painting floated quietly in the air. In the painting there was still a mountain far away near the water, a lone boat, and an old man. Recalling the scene in the illusion, Li Mu was dumbfounded. With just a brush he could create something out of nothing. Was this the power of a painter? While Li Mu was shocked, Zhou Yi had already walked to the bedside. She turned around and asked Li Mu, "Have you slept here before?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes." Zhou Yi bent down and sniffed lightly. Her eyes narrowed and she said, "You are lying to me. This is not your smell." Li Mu opened his mouth and explained, "This?" Zhou Yi said coldly, "Think carefully before you speak. You should know what the punishment is for the crime of deceiving the Empress." Li Mu said helplessly, "In addition to me, my wife has also slept here." Zhou Yi sniffed again and indeed smelled the scents of two people. One was Lu Hanyan's and the other was Li Mu's. The two scents were mixed together. In other words, the two of them had occupied her house and slept in her bed. Perhaps Li Mu had even picked a flower from her garden and put it on another woman's head. Zhou Qiong found it hard to imagine what they had done on this bed. She closed her eyes and said, "You can go. I want to be alone for a while." Li Mu sighed. What should come finally came. He wanted to explain but he did not know what to say. In the end he could only cup his hands and say, "I will take my leave." As his voice fell, his figure disappeared in an instant. Zhou Yi walked out of the small building, walked to the lakeside and sat down with her hands on her knees. By the lakeside a few fish swam around carefreely. When two of the fish swam in front of her, they suddenly stopped and then began to peck each other. Zhou Yi was inexplicably angry. She picked up a stone and threw it into the water. Splash! The stone fell into the water and splashed. The two fish were startled and separated, swimming in different directions. Zhou Yi coldly snorted, "Who asked you to kiss again?" Chapter 423. When Li Mu left the cave he realized that it was his place. But the Empress took it, so be it. She was the Empress and he was the one who didn't care about morality. It was only right for him to take a step back. Li Mu had some thoughts about the painting, but he wasn't in the mood to think about it. The Empress wanted to be alone and Xiao Bai and Wan Wan were playing somewhere. He had nothing to do so he took a stroll on the street. Unknowingly he walked to the Shindu Yamen. Inside the Luoyang Yamen Wang Wu saw a familiar figure and stood up immediately. He asked in surprise and joy, "Sir Li, what brings you here?" Li Mu asked, "Is Li Si here?" Wang Wu nodded. "Yes, he's in the back office. I'll go inform him now." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "Do what you need to do. I'll go find him myself." The Shindu Yamen was Li Si's territory now. Li Si was at the peak of his life. His career and family were both successful. No one would have thought that a small constable in Yangqiu County would have such a position in just 2 years. It was lunchtime. Li Mu picked a restaurant and drank a few cups with Li Si. After 3 rounds of wine, Li Si asked casually, "Where's the boss and Miss Hanyan?" Li Mu said, "They're at Mount Baiyun. They still have some important things to do." Li Mu wanted to drink to drown his sorrows, but the bitter wine made him even more sorrowful. He put down the cup and looked at Li Si again. "I want to ask you something on behalf of a friend." Li Si glanced at him and took a sip of wine. "Speak." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "This friend of mine did something wrong and hurt another friend of his. He doesn't know how to ask for her forgiveness now." After listening to Li Mu's description, Li Si asked, "Your friend and your friend's friend are the two you mentioned last time, right?" Li Mu nodded. "That's right." Li Si said, "It's been so long. I thought they were already together. Why are they still friends?" Li Mu explained, "It's not the kind of relationship you think." Li Si asked, "If it's not that kind of relationship, would they be together every day and night and even live together?" Li Mu said, "It's because of work." Li Si took a sip of wine and said, "Can't you just end the working relationship as soon as possible? If this continues, won't they be annoyed?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "It's not what you think. My friend has a family." Li Si retorted, "When you had a family, weren't you also with the boss? Is that different?" "What's different? Is she married?" "Not really." "Then what are you afraid of? They're not like what you think. You're not him. How do you know?" Li Si thought for a moment and said, "How about this? From now on, if you're that friend of yours, imagine if that woman gets married. How would you feel?" Li Mu suddenly woke up. Imagine if the Empress had an Empress and concubines. How would he feel? Damn it, if he didn't think about it he wouldn't know. Now that he thought about it, Li Mu realized that he had such a strong desire to possess the Empress. Of course he didn't want to possess her body. He wanted to be loved by her. He didn't want to share the Empress's love with a second person. He didn't want a second person to be with her every day. He didn't want her to get hurt for a second person. She even sent her avatar and left the divine capital to save him. The Empress was so good to him, but he became arrogant and hurt the Empress. Thinking about it, it was too much. Li Mu stood up and said, "Drink by yourself. I'll leave first." After leaving the restaurant, Li Mu first used a sound transmission magic treasure to contact Lu Hanyin and Li Qing, who were far away in the North County. He told them which small building in the cave belonged to the Empress. As for the reason, he explained it very clearly. Becoming the Empress of the Great Zhou wasn't her intention. When the Emperor Qi in the ancestral temple condensed and the Great Zhou had a new emperor, she would retire. She would grow grass and flowers and become their neighbor as an ordinary woman. Different from Li Mu's deduction, Lu Hanyin didn't blame him and didn't make trouble for no reason. Instead, she asked Li Mu to apologize to the Empress on her behalf. This way, Li Mu only needed to obtain the Empress's forgiveness. He slowly sighed and walked toward the palace gate. Chengel Palace. Zhou Yi sat on the dragon throne, but she wasn't in the mood to read. Mr. Mei saw that the Empress was unhappy. He stood quietly to the side and didn't say anything. Zhou Yi didn't say much. She snorted and asked, "Mei Wei, what's the punishment for deceiving the Empress according to the law?" Mr. Mei said softly, "Your Majesty, the punishment for deceiving the Empress is execution according to the law." She raised her head and said, "I don't know who is so bold. I'll have someone catch him and bring him back for questioning." Zhou Yi said angrily, She only said one word, then she was discouraged. She shook her head and said, "Forget it." Mr. Mei thought for a moment and asked, "Did Li Mu make your Majesty angry again?" Hearing someone mention it, Zhou Yi felt wronged again. She couldn't help but say, "He gave away the small building I built in my flower garden to others. He even lied to me. Don't you think I should punish him?" Mr. Mei was also angry after hearing this. He said, "You should. Your Majesty is so nice to him. This bastard dared to do this to your Majesty. I'll catch him and give him 100 beatings." Zhou Yi hesitated and said, "You don't have to punish him so severely, do you?" Mr. Mei said, "He should be taught a lesson." Zhou Yi sighed and said, "Forget it. I'm not related to him. It's normal for him to be nice to his wife." Mr. Mei was even more indignant. He said loudly, "Your Majesty is so nice to him. You dote on him and protect him. When the tributes from the counties arrived, he was the first one you thought of. This is how he repaid your Majesty. No, I can't take this lying down. If I don't teach him a lesson, I'll be ashamed of myself and your Majesty." At this time, Shangguanli walked in and said, "Your Majesty, Li Mu wants to see you." Lord Mei said coldly, "Let him wait outside for 2 hours before coming in." Zhou Yi hesitated. She was about to speak when she said firmly, "Your Majesty, you can't protect him this time." Zhou Yi thought for a while and nodded. She sat on the dragon throne with a hesitant expression. After a few minutes, she looked outside the hall and said, "Come in." Mr. Mei looked helpless, but he could only watch Li Mu walk into the hall. She looked at Li Mu fiercely and asked, "How dare you come here?" Li Mu ignored Mr. Mei and looked at the Empress. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I'm guilty." Zhou Yi looked surprised. She coughed and put on a dignified expression. She asked, "What are you guilty of?" Li Mu said sincerely, "I shouldn't have lied to your Majesty. I shouldn't have slept in your Majesty's pavilion without your Majesty's permission. Please punish me, your Majesty." Mr. Mei snorted and said, "The crime of lying to the Empress is punishable by death. Do you think a small punishment can make up for your crime?" Zhou Yi stood up from the dragon throne and said lightly, "It's good that you know you're wrong. Just don't do it again." Lord Mei stared blankly at the Empress with a blank expression. Li Mu bowed and said, "Thank you, your Majesty." Soon Li Mu, Shangguanli, and Mr. Mei walked out of the Chengel Palace together. Li Mu turned to Mr. Mei as soon as he stepped out of the gate. He said with disappointment, "Sister Mei, I called you sister so many times. How could you treat me like this in front of Her Majesty? You disappoint me." Li Mu shook his head and left. Mr. Mei stood there for a long time. Then he turned to look at Shangguanli and said seriously, "I swear if I say another word I'll be a dog." Chapter 424. One should learn from one's mistakes. If one had to use countless lies to cover up a lie, it would be better to be honest from the beginning. After getting a new residence, the Empress generously gave the small building to Li Mu. This incident ended without any mishaps. However, Mr. Mei's behavior disappointed him. The two of them had such a deep friendship, but he actually fanned the flames in front of the Empress. Li Mu needed to reconsider their friendship. Li Mu was full of apologies to the Empress. The Empress was very good to him, and Li Mu seemed to be using her kindness to do whatever he wanted, ignoring her feelings. Even if he was favored, he couldn't be fearless. A relationship had to be maintained for a long time, and it had to be mutual. If he relied on her to do whatever he wanted, he would only end up with nothing. This was the conclusion that Li Mu had come to after observing countless relationships. Fortunately, the Empress was magnanimous and Lu Hanyan was tolerant. Baiyin Mountain. Main Peak. Li Qing looked at Lu Hanyan's melancholy expression and asked, "Sister, what's wrong?" Lu Hanyan sighed and said, "I'm a little regretful now." Li Qing asked, "What do you regret?" Lu Hanyan said, "How great would it have been if I had stayed with him in the North County?" The next day, outside Chang'an Palace, Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li stood outside the palace, occasionally glancing inside. Li Mu had walked into Chang'an Palace for 2 hours. He didn't know what he had to say to the Empress. They hadn't finished talking for 2 whole hours. Yesterday he wanted nothing more than to behead him. Today he was being lovey-dovey again. Mei Darren sighed. She had watched His Majesty grow up. She thought she understood His Majesty very well. However, she didn't know when it started, but she couldn't guess His Majesty's thoughts. In Chang'an Palace, Li Mu was actually playing aeroplane chess with the Empress. This was a game that Wan Wan and Xiaobai often played. They often used this game to decide who would sleep in Li Mu at night. The Empress was with them every day and she had also learned this new form of entertainment. Li Mu took the initiative to admit his mistake, and the Empress also forgave him. The relationship between monarch and subject returned to how it was before. At this time, Li Mu finally had the mood to talk to her about the painting. Zhou Yi threw the dice and asked, "Have you comprehended the mystery of that painting?" Li Mu nodded and described the scene he saw in the painting. Zhou Yi was silent for a moment and said slowly, "Reverend Daoxian indeed hid the art of painting in that painting. Thousands of years ago, when the 100 schools of thought were contending, the art of painting used the art of creating something from nothing, and it was also one of the best in the 100 schools of thought. However, after the death of Reverend Daoxian, the art of painting lost its inheritance. This is the only painting left behind by Reverend Daoxian. Later generations only guessed that perhaps the mystery of painting was hidden in this painting, but I didn't expect it to be true." Li Mu thought of those scenes and said with some shock, "With such a mysterious art of creating something from nothing, weren't the art cultivators back then invincible?" Zhou Yi shook her head and said, "In the path of cultivation, who dares to say that they are invincible? Legalism cultivators can say that they are the law, but they are not invincible in the world. Every path has its strengths and weaknesses, and there is no true invincibility. Although each path of cultivation has its strengths and weaknesses, but if one cultivates all paths, one can learn from the strong points to make up for the weak points, and might not be invincible." At this moment, Zhou Yi stretched out her hand, a white light flashed, and the painting appeared in her hand again. She handed the painting to Li Mu and said, "Since you can comprehend the inheritance of Reverend Daoxian, this painting is for you, and you can slowly comprehend it." Li Mu took the painting and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." An hour later, Li Mu walked out of the Chang'an Palace with the painting in his hand. "Stop." He had only taken 2 steps when Mr. Mei's voice came from behind him. Li Mu stopped, turned around and asked, "What's the matter?" Mr. Mei walked up and knocked on his head. "You're all grown up now and you don't even call me sister anymore." Li Mu glanced at her and asked, "Is there a sister who would risk her life to kill her brother?" Mr. Mei's face darkened and he said, "Don't mention this to me again." Li Mu was just saying Mr. Mei watched the Empress grow up, and he must be closer to her than Li Mu. Just based on this, not to mention her, even Li Mu himself felt sorry for the Empress. Mr. Mei glanced at him and saw the thing in his hand and said in shock, "Her Majesty actually gave this painting to you?" Li Mu looked at the painting in his hand and asked, "Is there a problem?" Mr. Mei's expression was complicated and he said, "Her Majesty liked painting when she was young, and she admired the painter Reverend Daoxian very much. This is the only authentic work of Reverend Daoxian, and also Her Majesty's favorite painting, and it was the betrothal gift that the late emperor gave to the Zhou family." She was a little emotional and said, "Her Majesty actually gave her favorite thing to you." From the way the Empress purposely took this painting away from the small building, it was obvious that she really liked this painting, but she still gave it to him without hesitation. Li Mu was touched and the guilt in his heart deepened. He walked aimlessly to the Luoyang Yamen, and Li Si saw him and immediately said, "Next time you treat me to a drink, pay the bill first." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "This time I'm not here to treat you to a drink, I have a question to ask you." Li Si said indifferently, that friend of yours is in trouble again? Li Mu nodded and said, under what circumstances would a person give her favorite thing to you? Li Si glanced at him and said, if a person is willing to give her favorite thing to you, then that thing is not her favorite thing but you. Li Si looked at Li Mu and said word by word, you are her favorite thing. When Li Mu left the Luoyang Yamen he had a lot on his mind. Was it like Li Si said that he was the empress' favorite thing? Li Mu was sure that the empress liked him. In the eyes of others he was originally the empress' favorite official. The empress was his solid backing. He was in front of the empress, charging and breaking through enemy lines for her, solving problems for her. This kind of official deserved to be more favored. Although he was not as good as Li Si, he was not an idiot who did not know anything about love. Wasn't the empress being too nice to him a little too much? It was his first time being someone's official, and he did not know what a favored official should be like. Moreover, as an insider, Li Mu could not answer this question himself. He decided to find an outsider to ask. Mr. Mei was undoubtedly the best choice. He was the empress' favorite official, and he knew the empress best as well as the relationship between him and the empress. Li Mu took her to a place far away and set up a soundproof array. Mr. Mei looked around and said angrily, why are you being so secretive? Li Mu asked, Sister Mei, do you think Her Majesty treats me well? As soon as he said that, he was hit on the head. You're so heartless. How dare you doubt Her Majesty treats you well? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Let me tell you, you can doubt anyone but Her Majesty. If Her Majesty doesn't treat you well, no one else in the world will treat you well. Li Mu did not get an answer from Mr. Mei. Instead he was beaten up. He was extremely suspicious that she was abusing her power to avenge a private grudge. At the gate of the Zongjing Temple, Zhang Chun and Prince Shou watched from afar. They did not come up until Mr. Mei left. Zhang Chun asked, how did you offend Mr. Mei? Nothing. Li Mu rubbed his head and asked Zhang Chun casually, Mr. Zhang, do you think Her Majesty treats me well? Zhang Chun stopped and slowly looked at Li Mu saying, Mr. Li, you must have a conscience. How could you doubt, how dare you doubt Her Majesty treats you well? Li Mu explained, that's not what I meant, Zhang Chun asked. Then what do you mean? Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, I mean, how did the former emperor treat his favored officials, compared to Her Majesty's treatment of me? Zhang Chun shook his head and said, I wasn't an official at that time, how would I know? Prince Shou glanced at Li Mu and said lightly, how can the former emperor's favored officials be compared to you? The former emperor didn't treat you as well as Her Majesty did. Chapter 425. In Li Mu's era, the feudal dynasty had long ceased to exist. He didn't know how the ancient emperors treated their favored officials. He knew how the emperors treated their concubines. King Zhou was obsessed with Daji's beauty, King Yu of Zhou played with the warlords with the beacon fire just to make Bao Si smile, and Emperor Ming of Tang doted on Yang Guifei. In the future, everyone knew about their deeds. King Shou's words woke Li Mu up. In some people's eyes he was no longer a favored official, but someone like Bao Mo and Daji. Li Mu knew that the empress treated him well, but he didn't see it as clearly as King Shou and the others. It turned out that the empress treated him so well. The empress was the kind of person who would return the favor tenfold if someone treated her well. If Li Mu was a woman it wouldn't be a big deal. The empress treated Shangguan Li very well too. However, he was a man. If the empress treated him too well it would cause people to criticize him. However, Li Mu never cared about other people's criticism. Since he came to Shindu the criticism never stopped. He didn't care about these people's criticism. He only cared about the empress's feelings. After returning to the Li residence, Li Mu looked at the scroll in his hand. After thinking for a long time he took out a sound transmission instrument and said, Qin Shi, help me investigate something, Changel Palace. Zhou Yi leaned on the dragon throne with a book in her hand. After reading a page she realized that something was missing. She asked Mr. Mei, where's Li Mu? Li Mu was late but the empress couldn't help but ask. Mr. Mei sighed and said, Your Majesty, he didn't come to the palace today. Not long after Xiao Bai and Wan Wan ran in. Wan Wan brought a stick of candied fruit for Zhou Yi and said, Young master asked us to tell Sister Zhou that he has something to do in the North County. He will return to Shindu in a few days. Zhou Yi stood up and frowned. Didn't he just go to the North County? Xiao Bai looked disappointed and said, Benefactor didn't take us with him either. Zhou Yi looked at the stacked memorials on the table and took out a spirit conch. After activating it he asked, Why did you go to North Prefecture? Do you still care about the imperial court and the secretariat? Within the spirit snail, Li Mu's voice was mixed with the sound of the wind. Your Majesty, Mount Baiyun has summoned me urgently, so I have no choice but to return. I will explain everything to your Majesty when I return to Fairy's capital. I am still on my way, so let's talk later. After that, there was no more sound from the spirit snail. Zhou Yi put away the spiritual snail, gritted his teeth and said, What urgent summons from Mount Baiyun? Do you think I don't know why you're here? Men are all the same. Once they get married, they forget everything. The remaining small countries in the south also respected Great Zhou. They paid tribute every 5 years in exchange for Great Zhou's protection. This was the first time the various countries paid tribute since the empress ascended the throne. It was even more important to show them the majesty of a great country. 2 men walked on the streets of Fairy's capital. The young man kept looking around as he walked. He sighed and said, Shangzhou is indeed Shangzhou. This is the most prosperous, most imposing and cleanest city I've ever seen. The other middle-aged man shook his head and said in a low voice, It's only bright on the surface. You have no idea what kind of life the commoners live here are living. What kind of darkness lies beneath all this brightness? The young man looked around and said doubtfully, But it looks like they're living a good life. The middle-aged man said faintly, It's all an act. Every year the Great Zhou court does this. After the tribute, everything goes back to normal. The young man looked carefully again and shook his head. I don't think they're faking it. Some things can't be faked. You're still young. There are some things you can't see through. The middle-aged man looked at the commoners of Great Zhou who walked past him. His lips moved, but he didn't say anything else. The last time he came to Fairy's capital, it was during the reign of the previous emperor. At that time, Fairy's capital looked brighter on the surface than it was now. However, the commoners of Great Zhou had faces full of numbness and despair. It left a deep impression on him. However, when he came to Fairy's capital again today, it was still the same Fairy's capital. However, the commoners of Great Zhou didn't seem to be the commoners of Great Zhou of the past. The numbness and despair on their faces were no longer there. Instead, it was replaced by smiles from the bottom of their hearts. Every commoner's eyes were shining. Was this still the Fairy's capital he knew? The middle-aged man was shocked. He muttered, What happened here in the past 5 years? At a tea stall by the roadside, a few passers-by were drinking tea and chatting. I wonder where Lord Li went. I haven't seen him in a long time. It's been a long time. The last time I saw him was a month ago. Lord Li just got married not long ago. He should be accompanying his wife. We're all experienced people. We can understand. Lord Li will probably come back. I feel uneasy when he's not in Fairy's capital. Me too. If I don't greet Lord Li every few days, I feel like something is missing. With Lord Li around, there's more to life. A middle-aged man sat by the tea stall. He looked at them and asked curiously, Excuse me, who is this Lord Li you're talking about? The few of them looked surprised. They exclaimed, You don't know Lord Li? The middle-aged man smiled and said, We're not from here. We don't know much about Fairy's capital. One of them poured him a cup of tea and said, Even if you're not from here, it's impossible that you haven't heard of Lord Li. This won't do. I have to explain it to you today. Just as he was about to speak, his body suddenly trembled. He looked ahead. A figure was walking on the street. The commoners crowded around him and greeted him warmly. He hurriedly stood up and waved with a smile. Lord Li, you're back. Beside the tea stall, 2 figures looked at the young man who was surrounded by the commoners of Fairy's capital. They looked surprised. Li Mu stayed on the street for a long time before he finally entered the palace. At the entrance of Changel Palace, he asked Mr. Mei, Is His Majesty here? Mr. Mei gave him a look, telling him to be careful later. Li Mu walked into Changel Palace. He bowed and said, Greetings, Your Majesty. Zhou Yi was reviewing memorials. He didn't even raise his head. He said calmly, It's only been a month. Why didn't you spend more time with your wife on Mount Baiyun? Why did you come back to Fairy's capital? Li Mu said, Your Majesty's birthday is coming soon. I have a few gifts for Your Majesty. Zhou Yi finally raised his head. He asked in surprise, How do you know my birthday? Li Mu smiled. Mr. Mei told me. Zhou Yi coughed softly. He asked, What gifts? Li Mu stretched out his hand. A few scrolls appeared in his palm. With a thought, the scrolls floated into the air and slowly opened. Zhou Yi took a look and was stunned. She didn't care about her manners. She stood up and said in shock, Jinren Daoxian's authentic works. There's only one of his authentic works. Where did you find so many? Li Mu lowered his head. He said, it's just a coincidence. Zhou looked at him. He counted with his fingers and said in disbelief, you dug up his tomb? Who should I find? The Empress looked at the painting and coughed lightly. Li Mu suddenly looked at the Empress and his eyes lit up. He was really stupid. The person who could teach him how to draw was so close and so far away. He looked at the Empress and said, the painting skills of the painters in the palace are definitely not bad. Can I have them teach me how to draw? Lord Mei said indifferently, you are the most experienced and skilled painters in the palace. Li Mu, the Imperial Secretariat's official, is currently learning how to paint. He wants to find one of you to teach him. The white-haired old man stepped forward and said, I admire Sir Li's actions very much. I'm willing to use all my life's knowledge to teach Sir Li painting skills. The other middle-aged man didn't dare to show weakness and said, it's my honor to teach Sir Li. I'm also willing to teach him all my painting skills. The last young man said, if Sir Li is interested in painting women, you can come to me at any time. Mr. Mei glanced at them and asked, your painting skills can't be easily taught to outsiders, so no one will teach him, understand? The old man was puzzled and asked, why? The middle-aged man was surprised and said, our master didn't set such a rule. The young man was puzzled and asked, why is that? Mr. Mei said coldly, you don't have to ask why. Li Mu asked, just say so. If anyone wants to teach him, they don't have to come tomorrow. The three men's expressions became serious and they immediately spoke. Yes, sir. Understood. Understood. After Lord Mei left, the three of them looked at each other with puzzled expressions. One moment he's allowed to teach, the next moment he's not. Is he going to teach or not? Of course not. Didn't you hear what Commander Mei said at the end? Whoever dares to teach him can pack up and go home tomorrow. Let's listen to Commander Mei. She's by His Majesty's side. Her wishes are His Majesty's wishes. We can't go against his orders. If he wants to teach, then teach. If he doesn't want to teach, then don't teach. What is His Majesty playing at? Alright, I remember that His Majesty also likes painting. The Art Saint's original work is in His Majesty's hands. If he doesn't want us to teach him, does His Majesty want to teach him himself? Shu, be careful with your words, Changel Palace. Li Mu had been standing there for 15 minutes. He was eating the grapes given by the Empress while waiting for Mr. Mei to return. Li Mu was quite confident about this matter. Although many people in Fairy's capital didn't like him, there were even more people who liked him. He wasn't loved by everyone, but with his status, it shouldn't be a problem to hire a few court painters to teach him painting. Moreover, the Empress had given him a verbal order not to force them. It was just a casual remark. Everyone knew that the Empress favored him the most. If anyone dared to refuse, they wouldn't have to come to work tomorrow. Soon, footsteps could be heard outside Changel Palace. Mr. Mei walked in and bowed. Your Majesty, none of the three painters are willing to teach him. Li Mu was stunned. Then he asked in disbelief, why? Lord Mei explained, they said that their painting skills are not taught to outsiders, so they can't teach you. In a courtyard, a middle-aged man in a long robe and a young man beside him stood quietly in the courtyard. Their gazes were looking in the direction of the imperial palace. Their eyes shone with a golden light. At the end of their line of sight, a certain part of the sky was shining with golden light. It didn't take long for the golden light in their eyes to disappear. That part of the sky also returned to its original color. The young man asked doubtfully, didn't Sir say that the great Zhou's destiny has come to an end, and that the common people are disloyal to the court? Why is there still so much psychokinesis in the great Zhou ancestral temple? The middle-aged man said in a deep voice, The Great Zhou of today is no longer the Great Zhou of the past. I originally thought that the Great Zhou replacing the Shao family was the last bit of destiny for the Great Zhou. I didn't expect that in just 5 years, no, in just 1 year, the Great Zhou would return to its 100-year-old peak. The young man asked, "Then do we still want to leave the Great Zhou?" The middle-aged man said softly, "Let's wait and see first." A strange light flashed in his eyes. He said meaningfully, "Li Mu." A rueful look appeared in the young man's eyes. He said, "That Li Mu is truly formidable. He actually has the ability to change the destiny of a country. If my great Yong also had such a character, the national strength would definitely be even more prosperous. In 100 years we might be able to unify the ancestral province." In the Chang'e Palace, the corners of Zhou Yi's mouth curled up. He said disdainfully, "In your dreams?" Li Mu, who was in the middle of painting, raised his head. He asked doubtfully, "What did your Imperial Majesty just say?" Zhou Yi's expression returned to normal. He said, "Nothing. Continue painting. Don't get distracted." Chapter 429. In the Chang'e Palace, Li Mu was painting seriously. These days, he gradually felt that it was not a bad thing that the painters in the palace were not willing to teach him. The Empress's attainments in painting were extremely high, and when she taught him, she was gentle and responsible. In just 2 days, Li Mu had already forgotten all about being a court painter, and was wholeheartedly focused on learning from the Empress. Zhou Yi stood beside Li Mu. As she looked, she said, "In painting there is no need to stick to the appearance. You have to use the appearance to write the spirit. You have to search for the feeling between resemblance and non-resemblance." Li Mu carefully pondered her words. After a while, the Empress sat back on the dragon throne and said softly, "Later today the imperial court will invite the ambassadors of the various countries to a banquet in the Chaoyang Hall. You will go with the officials of the Secretariat." Great Zhou was the sovereign state. Every time they paid tribute, they would invite the ambassadors of the various countries. At that time, besides the important officials of the imperial court, the Empress would also attend. After finishing this painting, Li Mu went to the Secretariat. Today's banquet was only for officials of the 4th rank and above. In the Secretariat, only the head of the Secretariat and 2 assistant ministers were qualified. Li Mu had just returned to the duty room when Louis walked in and asked, "Will Lord Li also attend today's banquet?" Li Mu nodded and said, "Her Majesty has asked me to go with the officials of the Secretariat." Although Li Mu's rank was not high enough, it was within Lu Yi's expectations that he would go. He smiled and said, "In that case I will call Lord Li again later." There was still some time before the banquet, so Li Mu had nothing to do. He stretched out his hand. With a flash of white light, the art saint's brush appeared in his hand. He gripped the brush and attempted to draw a few strokes in the void, yet nothing was left behind. Li Mu had the Empress try before, and she was also unable to use the ultimate art of creating something from nothing of the painting path. It was fine if Li Mu couldn't do it, but even the Empress couldn't. Li Mu had reason to suspect that this technique was the same as Dao techniques and mystical powers. It should also require a chant or an incantation. Unfortunately, the tomb of the art saint was very simple. Other than this brush and a few authentic works, there was nothing else. On the Dao of painting, Li Mu encountered the same predicament as Xiao Bai. They both lacked cultivation dermic formulations. Xiao Bai's predicament was easy to resolve. The white fox race was still a large Fey race, but the Dao of painting had not appeared for a long time. At present, the only thing Li Mu could do was to learn painting from the Empress and wait for the right opportunity. Half an hour later, Li Mu, Lu Yi, and the others walked towards the Chaoyang Hall. This hall was to the left of the Crepe Myrtle Hall. During the time of the previous emperor, he often held banquets for officials and clans. Walking into the Chaoyang Hall, Li Mu walked to his seat and sat down looking across. At this banquet, the officials of the Great Zhou sat on the left, and the ambassadors of the various countries sat on the right. Across from Li Mu were the ambassadors of the various countries. There were more than 10 small countries in the southeast and southwest of Zhou province. The combined area of these small countries was only half the size of Great Zhou. In these 100 years they were all vassals of Great Zhou. They paid tribute to Great Zhou and Great Zhou provided them with protection. Other than this relationship, Great Zhou would not interfere with their internal affairs. Among these countries, Liang, Yu, Jiang, Jing, Xin, and Yong were the most powerful. Among the 6 Taoist sects, other than the Fulu school and Xuanzong, which were located in Great Zhou, the other 4 sects were located in Liang, Yu, Jiang, and Jing. Relying on these 4 sects, these 4 countries had considerable influence in the south. Although Shin did not have a Taoist sect, it was the birthplace of Buddhism. Among the various countries, it had the largest area and the largest population. Its strength could not be underestimated. In the past, Shin was a formidable rival of Great Zhou. When Great Zhou was first established, Shin took advantage of the Great Zhou's instability to provoke Great Zhou. Taizu sent troops to attack Shin's capital. If it were not for Great Zhou's policy of peace, Shin would have long been erased from the Zhou continent. Since then, Xinhua had been completely well-behaved. For a long time, Shin had the ambition to become the overlord of the Zhou continent. However, due to the existence of Great Zhou, they could only settle for second place. Even so, they never extinguished their desire to dominate. Although Yong did not have any powerful sects, Yang's imperial family was extremely powerful. They had more than one expert of the upper realm, far surpassing the Great Zhou's Shao clan. What was even rarer was that as Great Zhou's emperors grew more and more muddle-headed with each generation, Yong produced 5 generations of wise emperors. They worked hard for 100 years, sweeping away all obstacles within the country and completing the peaceful unification of the country. During these 100 years, Yang's national strength steadily increased. In Zhuzhou, it was the 3rd most powerful country, second only to Great Zhou and Shin. In the beginning, the other countries were very submissive to Great Zhou, practically kneeling and begging. They wanted to use their tributes in exchange for Great Zhou's protection. Without Great Zhou, they would have to face enemies from other continents. However, following the decline of Great Zhou, their thoughts naturally changed. They began to look forward to Great Zhou's destruction and its replacement as the new overlord of the Zhou continent. However, the previous emperor's muddle-headedness had caused Great Zhou to sink into a quagmire. Coincidentally, the Great Zhou had rebelled and seized power, causing Great Zhou to become even more chaotic. The other countries' thoughts were bound to become even more active. This tribute had to intimidate these people enough. Otherwise, Great Zhou would lose its right to speak on the Zhou continent and its prestige as a great country. While Li Mu was observing the various countries' envoys, a man seated across from him, wearing clothes different from those of Great Zhou, called over the eunuch behind him and asked in a low voice, "Who is Lord Li Mu of your esteemed country?" The eunuch looked across, his gaze searching. Replying to the envoy, starting from the table directly across from you, the 3rd person on the left is Lord Li Mu. The man, as well as the several people at the 2 tables beside him, looked over at the same time, their hearts trembling. He's that Li Mu? He's so young. Great Zhou has changed too much in the past few years. This person is so young, but his methods are so powerful. Everyone had been in Luoyang for several days and was no stranger to Li Mu's name. On the first day they arrived in Luoyang, they had heard of his name in the ears of the common people. At first they were curious, but after some investigation they were only left with shock. Abolishing the criminal substitution law, reforming the recruitment of officials, cleaning up the academy's court, attacking the old and new parties, and taking back power to the Empress of Great Zhou. Everything he did was earth-shattering. Who didn't know about the criminal substitution law of Great Zhou? This law separated the common people from the nobles. Although it was convenient for the nobles and officials, it was a nightmare for the poor common people. Ever since this law was promulgated, the faith of the people of Great Zhou decreased year by year. The various countries saw this and were happy in their hearts. The emperor of Great Zhou was so muddle-headed, and the court was so decadent. It would be best if the various counties of Great Zhou rose up in revolt and rebelled against the court. This would also give them an opportunity to take advantage of and divide up Great Zhou. From then on, they would no longer have to submit to others. However, in the past 5 years this law had been abolished. Li Mu had also used a few cases to trick the previous emperor into giving away the death exemption golden medallion. From then on, the nobles who broke the law would be punished the same as the common people. After these things, the people of Great Zhou began to unite again. In addition, Li Mu had also proposed the imperial examination, breaking the academy's dictatorship. Li Mu noticed that an envoy from the Xin kingdom sitting opposite him seemed to have received some kind of message. His expression slowly darkened. He left his seat and walked to the center of the hall. In a deep voice he said, "Your Majesty, I have just learned that a citizen of my country has been killed in your country. You must give us a satisfactory explanation for this matter. Otherwise, the Shin kingdom will no longer pay tribute to the Great Zhou Empire. When the courtiers in the hall heard this, they were immediately in an uproar. Even if it was an ordinary case of murder, they could not afford to be careless. At a critical juncture when the various countries were paying tribute, a citizen of another country had been killed in the Great Zhou. The impact would be even worse. If they were not careful, it would incite conflict between countries. This was especially so when the Shin kingdom was already disloyal. They could use this as an excuse. Mr. Mei walked out from behind the curtains and said, "Your Majesty, please move to the Ziwei Palace and order the Ministry of Justice to immediately bring the people involved in this case to the palace." Assistant Minister Yang of the Ministry of Justice stood out and said respectfully, "Yes, Your Majesty." After that, he strode out of the hall and quickly walked out of the palace. Ministry of Justice. A group of people gathered outside the Ministry of Justice and discussed animatedly. That citizen of the Shin kingdom clearly fell on his own and hit the stone steps. He can't blame anyone else, but if that young man didn't chase after him, he wouldn't have fallen. Nonsense. If he didn't steal, would others chase after him? But he's dead in the end, and he's from another country. I'm afraid that young man will have to pay with his life. Within the Ministry of Justice, Assistant Minister Yang looked at Wei Peng and sighed. He said, "The envoy of the Shin kingdom is using this opportunity to make a statement. If this matter isn't handled well, I'm afraid that something big will happen." "Where's that criminal?" "I have to bring him to the palace." Wei Peng nodded and said, "He's in the prison. I'll go get him." He walked into the prison of the Ministry of Justice and opened a cell door. He said to a pale-faced young man, "Let's go. I'm afraid this is your only chance to enter the palace in your life." The young man's face was filled with despair. He said in a trembling voice, "Sir, I don't want to die yet." Wei Peng glanced at him and asked, "Why do you want to die?" The young man's body trembled. He said with infinite regret, "If I didn't chase after him, he wouldn't have died." Wei Peng asked in return, "You were just in a hurry. When did you chase after him?" Chapter 430. Outside the prison. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Yang Lin, shook his head at Wei Peng and said, "It's useless. Once we reach the Golden Palace, we just need to search his soul and the truth will be revealed. Have you forgotten what happened 5 years ago?" Wei Peng patted the thick law of the Great Zhou in his arms. He looked at the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice and said meaningfully, "Sir, times have changed." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice sighed and said, "I don't know if times have changed or not. I only know that during this year of tribute, the Shin kingdom has always had ulterior motives. They will definitely use this as a pretext to make a fuss. This time they will definitely not let go of this opportunity." He patted Wei Peng's shoulder and said, "Let's go. You also go to the palace. You know more about this case than I do. When we reach the palace, be careful what you say." The young man looked nervously at Wei Peng and asked, "Sir, I have never been to the palace. What should I do later?" Wei Peng said indifferently, "It's very simple. When we reach the palace, don't say or do anything." Palace, Crepe Myrtle Palace. Today's lunch banquet was already nearing its end. After the emergency of the Shin kingdom people dying in the Great Zhou Shindu, the important officials of the Great Zhou all moved to the Crepe Myrtle Palace. The envoys of the various countries also followed. At this time, most of the officials still didn't know what had happened. Soon, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice brought 2 people into the palace. After the report, everyone knew what had happened. This Shin kingdom person had stolen a precious piece of jewelry from a jade shop in the Shindu. After being discovered by the shopkeeper, he fled through the door. The shopkeeper went out to chase after the thief, but because of his old age, he was left further and further behind by the thief. A passerby saw injustice on the road and helped the shopkeeper chase after the thief from the Shin kingdom. Unexpectedly, the thief panicked and accidentally fell. Coincidentally, his head hit the top of the stone steps on the street. Immediately, his brain splattered and he died. As a result, the courageous citizen of the Great Zhou became the murderer of this person. In the palace, many of the officials of the Great Zhou had extremely gloomy expressions. Every time the various countries paid tribute, other than diplomatic missions, there would also be some merchants accompanying them, bringing goods from various countries to be sold in the divine capital. In the beginning, when Great Zhou was at its peak, all countries, regardless of whether they were diplomatic missions or merchants, were well behaved and abided by the laws of Great Zhou. They didn't dare to do anything that violated the law. But in the past 50 years, with the decline of Great Zhou's national power, the intervals between tributes from other countries gradually increased, and the tributes gradually decreased. The actions of foreigners in Great Zhou also became more and more unbridled. By the time of the previous emperor, Great Zhou had completely lost the spirit of a great country. Furthermore, in order to rope in these small countries and prevent them from leaving the Great Zhou while he was in power, the previous emperor even gave them a lot of preferential treatment. From the beginning, merchants from other countries were exempted from all taxes in the Great Zhou, to indulging them in breaking the law and even committing crimes within the Great Zhou's borders. The law of Great Zhou could govern the citizens of Great Zhou, but it couldn't govern the citizens of other countries. This caused the previous emperor's reign to be the most aggrieved period for the citizens and officials of Great Zhou. This aggrieved feeling reached its peak 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the last time the various countries paid tribute, a merchant from the Shin nation raped a woman in the divine capital and was injured by a righteous man. The Shin nation diplomatic mission flew into a rage and threatened that if Great Zhou didn't give them a satisfactory explanation, they would sever their tributes with Great Zhou. In order to maintain stability, the previous emperor publicly executed that righteous man, but released the criminal from the Shin nation. This became the most humiliating diplomatic incident in the history of Great Zhou. It forcefully broke the backbone of the citizens of Great Zhou, causing the citizens of other countries, especially those from the Shin nation, to act recklessly in Great Zhou. However, the citizens of Great Zhou didn't dare to voice their anger. 5 years later, this scene repeated itself once again. Perhaps Xinhua had done it on purpose. In the Crepe Myrtle Palace, the Shin nation diplomatic mission said with a cold expression, "A citizen of my Shin nation died in your Great Zhou. The Great Zhou court must severely punish the murderer and give us an explanation." At this moment, under the gazes of the people in the imperial court, a figure slowly stepped forward. Wei Peng looked at the Shin nation diplomatic mission and asked, "Murderer? What murderer?" The Shin nation diplomatic mission said, "Of course it's the murderer who caused the deaths of our citizens." Wei Peng shook his head and said, "A merchant from your country committed a theft in the Great Zhou's divine capital. When he was escaping, he accidentally fell and hit the stairs and died. What does this have to do with others? How can there be a murderer?" The Shin nation diplomatic mission said coldly, "Who are you? What does this have to do with this case?" Wei Peng said indifferently, "I am the head of the Ministry of Justice, Wei Peng." Instead, he walked out of the imperial palace with the other officials. Outside the imperial palace, there were already many commoners waiting to see what was going on. They did not dare to approach the other officials. When they saw Li Mu come out, they immediately surrounded him, all of them talking at once. "Official Li, how was it? How did Her Imperial Majesty decide? Will that righteous man pay with his life?" Li Mu looked at their earnest gazes and smiled. "It's been so long. You all still don't understand Her Imperial Majesty's temperament. How could she allow us, the people of the Great Zhou, to be bullied by outsiders on our doorstep? Her Imperial Majesty has already said that the people of the Shin nation apologized first. They only have themselves to blame and deserve to die. It has nothing to do with others. That righteous and courageous young man has already been acquitted and will leave the imperial palace in a moment." The commoners around him all cheered and jumped for joy when they heard this. "That's great. Her Imperial Majesty is mighty." There were also some commoners who thought further and asked Li Mu worriedly, "Officially, if the people of the Shin nation use this as an excuse to stop paying tribute to the Great Zhou, what should we do?" Li Mu said calmly, "They can choose to pay tribute or not. If they don't pay tribute, would our Great Zhou not be the largest country in the Zhou continent? Great Zhou has vast lands and abundant resources. Do we lack their tributes?" The commoners were stunned for a moment. After thinking about it, they quickly came to their senses. Official Li is right. Our Great Zhou has vast lands and abundant resources. Do we need their tributes? They can ride on our heads and ride roughshod over us. We don't need such tributes. If we take their tributes, we have to be bullied by them. We don't need their tributes. They can pay whoever they want. In order to record him well in the history books and to prevent the other countries from breaking away from the Great Zhou, the former emperor tolerated the other countries. God knows how much the people of Shindu suffered and how much suffering they suffered. When the merchants of other countries bullied the people of Shindu, the commoners dared not speak up. When the people of Shin raped women, the former emperor, who was muddle-headed, actually executed the righteous people who saw injustice. Great Zhou was a great country. As the people of Great Zhou, they could have been proud and arrogant. However, under the former emperor's muddle-headed policies, the commoners of Shindu were inferior to the people of other countries. The commoners had long had enough of this. Li Mu originally wanted to keep the tributes from the other countries. After all, it was the symbol of Great Zhou as the most powerful country in the Celestial Empire. After this incident, he had changed his mind. It was better not to ask for tributes. The former emperor wanted to use this method to gain a good reputation in the history books. However, he was scolded even more harshly by the historians. He was completely nailed to the pillar of shame in history. During his reign, the Great Zhou's national strength declined the fastest. The faith of the people declined the most. He even lost the throne of the Shao family. If nothing went wrong, he would be the most humiliated emperor of the Shao family. If he kept the tributes, the commoners would not praise him. If the empress did not want the tributes, she would have won back the dignity of the commoners. The commoners would not scold her. The tributes from the other countries should be paid willingly. They used the tributes in exchange for the protection of the Great Zhou. This was a kind of transaction. It was also their recognition of the strength of the Great Zhou. Li Mu had to let the commoners understand this principle. In the future, even if they did not pay the tributes, the commoners would not think it was the emperor's fault. He looked at the commoners in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, remember that the former emperor has passed away for 5 years. Great Zhou is no longer the Great Zhou of the past. From now on, no matter where you are in the Great Zhou, you can straighten your backs. You are the people of the Great Zhou. Behind you is the most powerful country in the Zhou continent." When he said this, he used a trace of his dermic powers. His voice echoed in the ears of the surrounding people. Yes, the former emperor has passed away for 5 years. Now our emperor is Her Majesty the Empress. What right does a barbarian country have to ride on our heads? It should have been like this long ago. As the commoners thought about this, many of them breathed rapidly. Their eyes started to turn red. You are the people of the Great Zhou. No matter where you are, you can straighten your backs. They had been waiting for this sentence for a very, very long time. Lord Li was right. The former emperor had passed away for 5 years. The people of the Great Zhou could stand up. At this moment, all the commoners present subconsciously straightened their backs. Seeing the two people walking out of the palace gates, Li Mu said, "Lord Yang." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice immediately walked forward and asked, "Lord Li, what are your orders?" Li Mu said, "The Great Zhou laws are used to protect the people of the Great Zhou. From now on, no matter which country you are from, as long as you dare to violate the laws of the Great Zhou in the Great Zhou, you will be severely punished." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice immediately bowed. "I understand." Li Mu patted him on the shoulder and whispered, "You have a high rank. You don't have to call me I in the future." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice only gave a simple and honest smile. Rank did not explain everything. Chapter 431. The ambassadors of the various countries had come with a premeditated plan. They wanted to sever their relationship with the Great Zhou to further attack the people of the Great Zhou. It had been a tradition for the countries of the Zhou continent to pay tribute to the Great Zhou for more than a century. If the various countries declared independence, the Great Zhou would only exist in name as the strongest country on the Zhou continent. This would cause the people of the Great Zhou to continue to lose their support. If the people's support was lost, it would be difficult to gather the emperor's qi, and the royal family would be unable to produce new experts. It wouldn't be long before the Great Zhou went from decline to decline. This was something that the various countries were happy to see. However, when they walked out of the Honglu Temple, they found that there were only a few figures on the streets that had been abnormally crowded yesterday. After some investigation, they found that the people of the divine capital had spontaneously gone to the ancestral temple to pay tribute. Because the people were paying tribute, the streets were empty. How united was the people of the divine capital? Under these circumstances, even if they stopped paying tribute, the impact on the people's support would be minimal. Even if they stopped paying tribute, it would instead cause the people of the Great Zhou to be more united. In the following half a day, the Ministry of Justice arrested dozens of foreign merchants who had violated the laws of the Great Zhou. They were flogged at the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, attracting countless people to watch. Their cheers could be heard from several streets away. There were also a few who had seriously violated the law and were likely to face several years of imprisonment. The ambassadors of the various countries protested this matter to the Great Zhou court, requesting that the Ministry of Justice release the relevant people, but they were rejected. One of the ambassadors of the Shin nation asked around and returned to the Honglu temple. He said to his companion, "I've asked around." When the memorial was delivered to the Great Zhou Secretariat, it was shot down. It was done by that Li Mu. This person is unmoved by force or persuasion. He's not afraid of anything. Another ambassador of the Shin nation thought for a moment, then said, "There's no other way. Let's just directly protest to the Empress of the Great Zhou. I don't believe that she's not afraid of us cutting off our tribute to the Great Zhou. If that happens, she'll become a sinner for all eternity." In the Changel Palace, Li Mu handed a memorial to the Empress, who was reading a book, and asked, "Your Majesty, the Shin nation's envoy threatened the imperial court. If we don't release them, they will cut off their tribute to the Great Zhou. How should I respond to them?" Zhou Yi flipped to a page and said indifferently, "Write a decree." The Great Zhou's offering was actually so extravagant as to use more than 10 Earth-rank Fulu talismans for target practice? This was too wasteful. Just from that attack just now, even a 6th-level cultivator would have to deal with it. Those below the 6th level would probably not even be able to escape with their primordial spirits. Another consecrator flicked his finger lightly, and a black pill-shaped object flew towards another human-shaped target. The two objects collided. After a strong spatial ripple, that human-shaped target was swallowed by a black hole in the void. Many people swallowed their saliva secretly. If this object landed on them, they probably would not be able to avoid the fate of being swallowed. This strange method of attack was simply unheard of. With his hands behind his back, Li Mu turned around and saw the shocked expressions of the crowd. He smiled and said, "Everyone, don't be nervous. The offering is just practicing against the enemy. It's all routine." In the next 2 hours, Li Mu brought the envoys to witness the routine of countless Great Zhou's offering. This included various powerful Fulu talismans, pills, and formations made by many offering that could trap a 6th-level cultivator to death. In the past, it would take 10 talisman liquids to draw 1 Fulu. Now that they could draw 10, the offering naturally did not have to be thrifty. They just needed to blow it up. If they did not have enough, they could ask for more. The imperial court was not lacking in Fulu now. In addition to spending thousands of Fulu talismans for the Empress, Li Mu and the Empress also refined some of the ancient pills that they had comprehended from the pages of Tao. They gave them to the offering so that they could familiarize themselves with using them in advance so that they could be more proficient against the enemy in the future. 2 hours later, the envoys walked out of the offering department. Their faces were somewhat pale. The scene that they saw in the offering department had left a deep impression on them. Was this the strength of the Zhou continent's overlord? Li Mu looked at them and said, "By the way, His Majesty has decreed that all countries no longer need to pay tribute to Great Zhou in the future. Great Zhou is still facing internal and external troubles. We really have no time to take care of the other countries. You may all return." The envoys from the small countries looked at each other, swallowed their saliva, and immediately spoke. "We have to pay tribute, we have to pay tribute. We can't break the century-old rule. The state of Wei is loyal and devoted to Great Zhou. We will never be disloyal. We pledge our lives to follow Great Zhou." It depicted an extremely handsome man, about as handsome as Li Mu. When he looked again, wasn't the man in the painting himself? After staring blankly for a moment, Li Mu seemed to have thought of something. Turning around, he stared at the young man and asked in an unfriendly tone, "Why did you draw this official's portrait? Are you planning to find an assassin to assassinate this official after returning to your country?" If not for Li Mu, the other countries would have been able to laugh at the ridiculousness of the Great Zhou, especially Great Yong. In the future, Great Yong would have the possibility of unifying the Zhou continent. If one had to say who they hated the most, it would naturally be him. The Yong kingdom's envoy had drawn his portrait for no apparent reason. Li Mu had enough reason to suspect that this person harbored evil intentions. Hearing his words, the young man became even more flustered. Promptly shaking his head, he said, No, I drew it casually." "Casually drew it?" Li Mu glanced at the painting again. The painting had both form and spirit, and it was extremely lifelike. In particular, the expression in the eyes was no different from that of a real person. It gave one the impression that the person in the painting would walk out of the painting at any moment. If this was called a casual drawing, then what were Li Mu's recent paintings called? At this moment, Li Mu felt that he had been insulted. Out of the protection of our great Zhou's merchants and local taxes, the officials of the Ministry of Revenue do not agree to the mutual reduction of tariffs between the two countries, the young envoy argued. This humble one believes otherwise. The mutual reduction of tariffs will make goods cheaper. This will be beneficial to the common people, as it will allow them to buy what they need at a lower price. Although this will intensify the competition between merchants to a certain extent, an appropriate amount of competition is beneficial to the development of commerce. This will benefit the people of both countries. If tariffs are reduced, it will inevitably attract even more merchants, and local taxes will only increase, not decrease. Li Mu regretfully said, "This official has no choice but to admit that your noble country's proposal is very good. This official also fully approves of it. However, this official's words carry little weight. I cannot oppose the entire Ministry of Revenue unless..." The youth's eyes brightened. He asked, "Unless what?" Li Mu replied, "Unless someone can convince His Imperial Majesty. If His Imperial Majesty agrees, then the Ministry of Revenue's opinion will not be important." The youth stood up and bowed to Li Mu. He earnestly said, "This is a matter beneficial to the people of Great Zhou. Darrenli is deeply loved and respected by the common people. I ask that Darrenli consider the common people of both countries and facilitate cooperation between the two countries." Li Mu sighed. "Although this official shares your thoughts, I cannot disregard the opinions of the entire Ministry of Revenue and speak before His Imperial Majesty. Otherwise, won't this official become a treacherous official who bewitches His Imperial Majesty into making arbitrary decisions?" The youth replied, "The eyes of the common people are as clear as snow. If Darrenli is a treacherous official, then there will be no loyal officials in the Great Zhou." When he said this, his tone was somewhat complicated. They had actually made two preparations for their trip to the Great Zhou. If the Great Zhou was an arrow at the end of its flight, they would break off the tributes and wait for the day when the Great Zhou collapsed. Then, Great Yong would find an opportunity to dominate the Zhou continent. If the Great Zhou was still powerful, they would abandon the first plan and strengthen trade and cooperation with the Great Zhou, vigorously develop the domestic economy, and raise the standard of living of the common people. Li Mu sighed. This official truly wishes to help, but is powerless to do so. The courtiers already have complaints about His Imperial Majesty's favor and trust in this official. If this official opposes the Ministry of Revenue again, who knows what they will say about this official behind my back? Perhaps they will say that this official was bribed by the state of Yong and received benefits from you, harming the interests of the Great Zhou. Speaking on your behalf, isn't this the same as framing this official as being heartless and unjust? He looked at the young envoy and said, "For this matter, you will have to personally seek out Her Imperial Majesty." Disappointed, the young man replied, "Darrenli is Her Imperial Majesty's most favored subject. If your words are useless, then even if we seek an audience with Her Imperial Majesty, it will be futile." Li Mu did not speak. His face revealed a contemplative expression, as if he was hesitating. A moment later, he looked back at the young envoy and said, "This official is fully aware that friendly trade between the two countries is greatly beneficial to both the people of the two countries and the court. Although this official is unable to directly help you due to my status, I can point you in the right direction." The young man's eyes lit up again. Cupping his fist, he said, "Please advise me, Darrenli." Li Mu looked at him and asked, "You should know that Her Imperial Majesty is very interested in painting, right?" The young man nodded. "I saw it a few days ago. The paintings hanging on the walls of Her Imperial Majesty's study are authentic works by Wu Daoxian." Even when the Empress mentioned the art sage, her tone was respectful. However, this young man from the Yong Kingdom directly called him by his name, not even adding the word sage. Perhaps there really was something to him. Li Mu casually asked, "If my guess is correct, you should be cultivating in painting, right?" The young man did not deny it. Nodding, he replied, "Yes." Li Mu unhurriedly said, "From what I know, Her Imperial Majesty is very fond of painting. Moreover, she is deeply in love with the art sage's authentic works. For many years she has been searching for the lost inheritance of painting. If you can fulfill Her Imperial Majesty's wish, then the matter of trade will not be a problem. After saying this he slowly stood up and said, "This official's words end here. I can't say anything more. Think about it yourselves." Finished speaking he turned and left. The middle-aged man walked out of the room. The young man raised his head to look at him and asked, "Royal uncle, what should we do?" The middle-aged man did not answer. Instead he asked, "What do you think?" After thinking it over the young man said, "Reducing tariffs and opening up trade with Great Zhou is a blessing for the common people of Great Yong. Although painting is an important part of the heavenly tomes, it is not that it cannot be taught to outsiders. Taoist cultivators are all aware of this. In the past thousands of years, they have become even more powerful. It is precisely because the other sects do not teach it to outsiders that they have declined." Chapter 434. Chengel Palace. Li Mu handed the letter from the Yong envoy to the Empress. "Your Imperial Majesty, the Yong envoy asked this subject to deliver this letter to Your Imperial Majesty. Please take a look, Your Imperial Majesty." Zhou Yi was eating tanghulu and didn't accept the letter. "We don't have time right now. Open it yourself and see what's written on it." Li Mu opened the letter and took out a piece of paper. Sweeping his eyes over it he whispered, "As expected." At the top of the paper were the words Painting Sutra written in large letters, followed by a line of small letters that read, "Divine Brush Ling Ling opening to Shangqing Liujia Fu Wei Song Luding Ding. I am now a calligraphy seal, concealing my body, meeting gold, meeting fire, fire hiding in the earth, the heavenly emperor, the sage." This letter contained the formula for the Tao of painting. Only by using this formula could one display the Tao of painting. As expected, the Tao of painting was also a type of Taoist technique. It didn't create objects out of thin air. It was between illusion and reality, yet it was more brilliant than both. It possessed more of a bewitching nature than Taoist techniques, and at the same time, it possessed a power that illusion didn't possess. After pondering for a moment, Li Mu took out his brush and drew a simple rune in the air. This time, a golden rune finally lit up in the air in front of him. In the next moment, the rune transformed into a golden thread that bound Shangguan Li's body. Shangguan Li coldly snorted and puffed out her chest. The golden thread collapsed, but at least it proved that Li Mu's conjecture was correct. By using the Tao of painting in the Fulu, ancient talisman techniques could be reproduced. Although the two were fundamentally different, the Tao of painting borrowed the power of heaven and earth. It didn't consume much of one's transcendence energy, and it could last longer in battle. The premise was that one had to simultaneously cultivate both Taoist techniques. Li Mu and the Empress studied for a few years and would certainly be able to better utilize the Tao of painting in the Fulu. With the Yong Kingdom's sincerity, Li Mu ordered the Chamberlain of Dependencies to hold a banquet and invite the Yong Kingdom's envoys to discuss the details of the friendly relations between the two countries. The countries in Zhou province needed to pay tribute to Great Zhou, but the tariffs between Great Zhou and the other countries were not light. In order to win over the other countries, the former emperor exempted them from the tariffs. It was only after the Empress ascended the throne that the tariffs returned to normal. This was the first time in history that the Great Zhou and the state of Yong had established trade cooperation at the national level. After the banquet ended, the Assistant Minister of Revenue walked out of the Chamberlain of Dependencies with a face full of doubt.